The sound of stiletto heels on marble echoed through the 42nd floor of Chen Industries Tower like a metronome counting down to judgment. Employees who moments before had been chatting near the coffee station scattered to their desks. Laughter died mid-sentence. A man fumbled his briefcase. The woman beside him pretended sudden fascination with her phone screen. Victoria Chen didn't acknowledge any of them. Her gaze swept the corridor with the practiced efficiency of a predator, assessing which animal in the herd showed weakness, which one might need culling, from the corporate ecosystem she'd built with ruthless precision over the past decade. No greeting, no smile, just that calculating stare beneath perfectly styled honey blonde waves that never seemed to move, no matter how many board meetings she powered through or how many late nights she spent dissecting quarterly projections until the numbers bent to her vision of what Chen Industries should become. Jennifer, her assistant, materialized from a side office clutching a tablet like a shield. Her breath came quick, the universal sign of someone who'd been running to keep pace with a woman who never slowed down for anyone. The words tumbled out in a rush. Mrs. Chen, the 9 o'clock meeting with the Victoria's hand rose. Jennifer's mouth snapped shut. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush bones. The two women stood 3 feet apart, but the distance between them measured in far more than inches. It measured in power and hierarchy, in the unspoken understanding that Victoria Chen's time cost more per second than most people earned in an hour, and wasting even a fraction of it meant consequences Jennifer couldn't afford. Victoria continued walking. Jennifer fell into step behind her 3 paces back, the appropriate distance for someone whose job consisted of anticipating needs before they were spoken, solving problems before they materialized, and staying invisible until the exact moment she was required. They approached a door, not the door to Victoria's corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. A different door, smaller, to the left. The door that led to the private therapy suite Victoria had commissioned 2 years ago, when it became clear that Emma and Sophie would need ongoing treatment, when the specialists had stopped using words like temporary and started deploying phrases like long-term management and adjusted expectations. Victoria's pace slowed, not much, just enough that someone watching closely might notice the fractional hesitation, the way her shoulders tensed beneath the tailored charcoal blazer that probably cost more than a month of Jennifer's salary. Her hand reached for the doorknob. Fingers wrapped around brushed nickel. Through the crack beneath the door, soft music played. Something classical. Debussy, maybe? Or Satie. The kind of gentle, meandering piano that therapists always seem to think soothe traumatized children. Victoria's grip tightened. Her knuckles went white. Then she released the handle like it had burned her, turned away, walked toward her office with renewed speed, heels clicking faster now. Almost like she was fleeing. Jennifer said nothing. She'd learned long ago that some doors stayed closed for reasons that had nothing to do with schedules or strategic priorities. Behind the unopened door, two 9-year-old girls sat motionless in motorized wheelchairs, staring at nothing, saying nothing, existing in a silence so profound it seemed to swallow all sound around them. They didn't react to the footsteps that had paused outside, didn't turn their heads when those footsteps retreated. They simply waited, as they'd been waiting for 4 years, for something to change in a world that had stopped making sense the day metal crunched and glass shattered, and they'd screamed for their mother, who never came. Marcus Wade pushed his cleaning cart down the same corridor 20 minutes later, the wheels squeaking in rhythm with his footsteps. The sound was familiar by now, a companion to the early morning routine he'd perfected over the past 3 weeks, since Chen Industries had hired him for their evening and weekend maintenance crew. Most companies contracted that work out to services that paid minimum wage and looked the other way when employees cut corners. Chen Industries kept their cleaning staff in-house, paid them decent wages with full benefits, and expected standards that matched the premium office space they maintained. Marcus met those standards. He'd always been good at meeting standards, at doing exactly what was asked of him with efficiency and competence, and the kind of quiet reliability that made him invisible in the best possible way. At 36, he'd learned how to make himself disappear. His 6'2" frame should have drawn attention, broad shoulders, and the kind of build that suggested he'd done physical labor all his life. But he'd mastered the art of moving through spaces without disturbing the air of existing adjacent to important people, without ever seeming to occupy the same world they inhabited. The Navy uniform helped. Navy meant worker, meant service, meant someone whose presence was expected but not acknowledged. The name tag stitched over his left breast pocket said Mwade in sans serif letters, no flourishes, nothing to suggest he'd once had business cards printed on heavy cream cardstock with Marcus Wade May Pediatric Rehabilitation Therapy embossed in elegant script. Those cards had been burned 2 years ago in a moment of grief-fueled rage that Jake, thank God, hadn't witnessed. His son didn't need to see his father destroy the last physical remnants of a career that had ended the day Claire stopped breathing. Marcus paused near the break room to check the supply level in his cart. Trash bags check, cleaning solution check, microfiber cloths in 3 colors coded for different surfaces because Chen Industries had standards about cross-contamination, paper towels, glass cleaner. The tools of invisibility. Terry from building security ambled past coffee cup in hand, gut straining against his uniform shirt. Marcus didn't wait for acknowledgement. He simply spoke, voice pitched low and friendly. "Morning, Terry. Your wife make those breakfast burritos again." Terry's face lit up with the particular joy of a man whose wife packed his lunch with love instead of obligation. "She did extra cheese this time. I keep telling her I need to diet, but life's too short for bad breakfast." Marcus cut in gently. "Besides, you walk this whole building every day. That's got to count for something." Terry laughed, the sound genuine and warm. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder with the easy camaraderie of someone who'd decided Marcus was good people, despite the difference in their official positions. Security versus maintenance. 2 sides of the same working-class coin, both invisible to the executives who rode the elevator to the top floor and never glanced down. Terry moved on. Marcus continued his route. At the reception desk on the 39th floor, he set down a granola bar with the kind of casual precision that suggested he'd placed it there by accident, that it just happened to land in the exact spot Sarah would reach for when the morning nausea hit around 10:30. Sarah glanced up from her computer. Her hand moved toward the granola bar, then stopped. She looked at Marcus with the kind of gratitude that people rarely offered cleaning staff, the kind that recognized him as a person who'd noticed her 3-month pregnancy and the green tinge to her complexion during first trimester hell. She opened her mouth. Marcus shook his head slightly, already moving past. No need for thanks, no need to make a moment of it, just one human helping another human, because that's what humans were supposed to do in a world that made kindness seem radical. The maintenance room on 42 occupied a space most employees didn't know existed. Marcus keyed in the code, changed weekly for security purposes, and slipped inside. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and machine oil, and the particular mustiness of spaces that never got enough ventilation. His locker stood in the back corner. He spun the combination lock, Claire's birthday, because he was that kind of cliché, and opened the metal door. The interior was sparse. A change of clothes, deodorant, a phone charger, and one framed photograph that lived on the small shelf at the top of the locker space. The photo showed a woman with dark curls and laughing eyes holding a newborn baby wrapped in a blue hospital blanket. Claire looked exhausted in the picture, dark circles under her eyes and her hair matted with sweat. But she was smiling. God, she was smiling like she'd just won every prize the universe had to offer. Marcus stared at the photo for exactly 10 seconds. Long enough to remember, short enough to avoid the spiral. His hand moved to touch the frame, then stopped an inch away. He didn't let himself make contact. Contact led to memory. Memory led to the cascade of what-ifs that had consumed the first year after her death. What if he'd been there during the delivery instead of finishing up with that patient in San Diego? What if he'd noticed the signs earlier? What if his expertise with pediatric patients had translated into recognizing the symptoms of peripartum stroke before it was too late? What if? What if? What if? Marcus closed the locker, spun the lock, checked his watch, 7:45. Jake would arrive in 5 minutes, dropped off by Mrs. Morrison from down the hall, who ran a before-school care service out of her apartment and charged rates. Marcus could barely afford, but paid anyway because his son needed stability more than Marcus needed to eat 3 meals a day. He headed for the building's rear entrance, the one employees used, the one that didn't have the marble floors and crystal chandeliers of the main lobby where clients and executives made their entrances. Jake appeared right on schedule, backpack nearly as big as his 7-year-old frame, his dark hair sticking up in the back where he'd forgotten to brush it. Again. The kid had his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn determination and absolutely zero interest in personal grooming. Jake's face brightened when he spotted Marcus. The boy broke into a run, sneakers squeaking on the polished concrete floor. The question came out breathless. "Dad, can I do homework in the break room?" Marcus kept his expression neutral, but he already knew the answer to the question he was about to ask. "You eat breakfast." Jake's silence spoke volumes. The kid had gotten dressed, grabbed his backpack, and bolted out the door without touching the cereal Marcus had set out at 6:30 before leaving for his shift. Marcus sighed, "Break room. I'll grab you a blueberry muffin from the cafeteria." Jake's entire face transformed. Pure joy uncomplicated by the weight that seemed to settle on most adults, somewhere between childhood and the realization that the world was harder than anyone warned you it would be, the ones with the sugar on top. Is there any other kind worth eating? Jake launched himself at Marcus's waist in a hug that nearly knocked the cleaning cart sideways. Marcus steadied the cart with one hand and ruffled his son's hair with the other, savoring the moment, because these moments had become precious in their scarcity. Jake was growing up. Soon he'd be too cool for public displays of affection, too aware of the social hierarchy that said kids hug their dads at home, but not where other people might see. Jake pulled back and grinned up at him. "You're the best dad ever." The words hit Marcus square in the chest. He didn't feel like the best dad ever. The best dads didn't raise their kids in one-bedroom apartments where the son slept in the bedroom and the father made do with a futon in the living room. The best dads didn't bring their 7-year-olds to work because reliable childcare cost more than they could afford. The best dads hadn't walked away from careers that could have provided the kind of life Claire would have wanted for Jake. But Marcus just smiled and pointed toward the break room. "Go on. I'll bring the muffin in 10 minutes. Jake scampered off. Marcus watched him go, this small person, who'd become the entire reason Marcus got up in the morning, the only thing tethering him to a world that had lost most of its color when Claire died. He returned to his locker. This time he opened it with purpose, reaching past the clothing to the folder tucked against the back wall. Inside the folder was a single piece of paper, the edges worn from handling the text still crisp enough to read. Marcus Wade, Master of Arts, Pediatric Rehabilitation Therapy, Johns Hopkins University, 2017. Below that, a list of publications. 3 peer-reviewed articles about trauma-informed care for children with selective mutism. 1 breakthrough study about nonverbal communication patterns in pediatric patients recovering from severe physical and psychological trauma. That study had made him something of a minor celebrity in rehabilitation circles, had led to speaking engagements and consultation requests from hospitals across the country. All of it meaningless now. All of it abandoned the day he'd stood in front of Claire's hospital bed and realized that every technique he'd mastered, every protocol he'd developed, every child he'd helped recover their voice or their mobility or their will to engage with a world that had hurt them, none of it had prepared him to save the one person who mattered most. Marcus folded the certificate back into the folder, slid it behind the clothes, closed the locker. The past was the past. He had a 7-year-old son who needed blueberry muffins in a future that didn't include hospital corridors or therapy sessions or the crushing weight of other people's expectations that he could fix the unfixable. He was a maintenance worker now. He cleaned floors. He emptied trash. He existed in the margins of other people's important lives. And that was enough. It had to be enough. Victoria Chen's office occupied the northwest corner of the 42nd floor. 2 walls of floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Chicago's skyline that real estate brokers would have called breathtaking and unparalleled. Victoria barely noticed them anymore. The views had stopped mattering around the same time her daughter stopped speaking. She stood at her desk, standing desk, because sitting meant weakness, meant surrender to the physical limitations of the human body, and reviewed the morning's first crisis with the detached efficiency of a surgeon examining an X-ray. The marketing team had submitted a campaign proposal that made her want to fire everyone involved. Not because the concept was bad, because it was soft, emotional, the kind of feel-good corporate responsibility nonsense that looked impressive on Instagram but did nothing to move product or increase market share. Chen Industries built enterprise software. Boring, unglamorous back-end systems that made logistics companies run smoother and manufacturers track inventory with precision and retail chains optimize their supply networks. Nobody bought enterprise software because they felt warm and fuzzy about the company's social media presence. They bought it because it worked better than the competition and cost less to implement. The knock on her door was soft, perfunctory, the kind of knock from someone who knew better than to expect an invitation to enter. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, tablet clutched against her chest like armor. The marketing team is ready for your feedback. Victoria didn't look up from her laptop screen. Tell them I've reviewed their proposal. Jennifer waited. She was good at waiting, at understanding that Victoria's silences contained volumes of information if you knew how to read them. Victoria's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. She still didn't look at Jennifer, but her voice carried the particular edge that preceded terminations and restructuring announcements. Tell them we're not selling emotions. We're selling solutions. If they can't understand the difference, I'll find a team that can. Jennifer made a note on her tablet. Her face remained neutral, but something in her posture suggested she was already mentally drafting the internal memo that would send half the marketing department into panic mode. Victoria continued, and cancel the lunch with the Singapore investors. Mrs. Chen, they flew in specifically for. The words came out flat, final. I said cancel. Jennifer's fingers moved across her tablet screen, rescheduling meetings, sending regrets, maintaining the complex machinery that allowed Victoria Chen to move through her day without friction or delay. A pause. Jennifer's voice softened by a fraction, though she was smart enough not to let actual sympathy creep into her tone. The girls have physical therapy at 2. Victoria's hands stilled on the keyboard. The muscles in her jaw worked visible beneath the professional makeup that cost $300 per consultation to apply perfectly. Her question came out, careful, controlled. Dr. Morrison still. Yes, 12th session. Any progress? Jennifer hesitated. That hesitation told Victoria everything she needed to know, but she waited anyway for the official confirmation, the professional version of what she already understood. He says the results are consistent with previous sessions, which means no. Jennifer said nothing. Victoria didn't expect her to. There was nothing to say, nothing anyone could say. They'd been through this dance a dozen times with a dozen different specialists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech pathologists, neurologists, psychiatrists. Every one of them had taken Victoria's money and delivered variations on the same conclusion. Emma and Sophie were as recovered as they were going to get. The paralysis was permanent. The muteness was intractable. Accept it. Adjust. Move on. Victoria had fired 3 doctors for using that last phrase. Move on, as if her daughters were a failed business venture to be written off and forgotten. She returned her attention to the laptop screen, effectively dismissing Jennifer without words. The assistant retreated, closing the door with a soft click that barely registered in Victoria's consciousness. Alone now, finally alone. Victoria's hands dropped from the keyboard. She stood perfectly still, staring at the laptop screen without seeing it. Her chest rose and fell with carefully controlled breaths, the kind of breathing exercises she'd learned from a meditation app she'd downloaded 6 months ago and used exactly once before deciding that sitting still with her thoughts felt like drowning. The door to the therapy suite was 30 feet away, through the wall, through the adjoining corridor. 30 feet and a world away. She could walk there right now, open that door, sit with her daughters while Dr. Morrison ran them through exercises designed to preserve what little mobility remained in their upper bodies. She could hold their hands, stroke their hair, whisper the kind of maternal reassurances that normal mothers offered their children without thinking twice. But she wasn't a normal mother. She was Victoria Chen, CEO. Victoria Chen, who'd been in a board meeting discussing quarterly projections when her daughters' bodies had been crushed between metal and asphalt. Victoria Chen, who'd answered 3 emails while her children screamed for her in the back of an ambulance. Victoria Chen, who no longer had the right to hold her daughter's hands. Her own hands moved now, independent of conscious thought. They opened the desk drawer, reached inside, withdrew a silver picture frame that lived face down in the drawer, hidden from view, but never far from reach. The photograph showed 2 4-year-old girls in matching pink tutus, their faces split wide with laughter, small hands reaching toward the camera. Emma's eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed just like Victoria's mother. Sophie had a gap between her front teeth that the dentist said would close naturally as her adult teeth came in. Those teeth had come in during the 4 years the photo had been taken. Sophie's gap had closed. Victoria had missed it. She'd missed so many things while buried in work and guilt, in the desperate attempt to fix something that couldn't be fixed with money or power or strategic planning. She stared at the photo for exactly 15 seconds, long enough to remember what her daughter's laughter sounded like, short enough to avoid the complete breakdown that always lurked at the edges of these moments. Then she set the frame face down in the drawer again, closed the drawer, returned her hands to the keyboard. Work. Work was the answer. Work was always the answer. Work demanded nothing except excellence, and excellence was something Victoria knew how to deliver. Jake Wade had perfected the art of looking busy while actually being bored. He sat at a small table in the break room with his math homework spread in front of him, chewing on the end of his pencil, and wondering why anyone thought third graders needed to know how to multiply three-digit numbers when calculators existed. The blueberry muffin his dad had delivered 10 minutes ago sat half-eaten on a napkin. It had been good the cafeteria here made everything from scratch, which Jake's dad said was unusual, and something to be grateful for, but Jake's attention had drifted. He could hear voices from the hallway, adult voices discussing adult things in that particular tone adults used when they thought kids weren't listening. Something about quarterly reports and restructuring and market penetration words that meant nothing to Jake but seemed very important to the people saying them. Jake finished the multiplication problem he'd been pretending to work on, checked his answer, got it wrong, erased it, tried again. Boredom won. He stood up, leaving his homework on the table, and wandered toward the hallway. His dad had said to stay in the break room, but technically he hadn't said Jake couldn't explore a little bit, and there was a difference between staying in one place and wandering around looking for something interesting. At least that's what Jake would argue if his dad caught him. The hallway stretched in both directions, all polished floors and glass walls, and the kind of modern design that made everything look expensive and untouchable. Jake had learned in his 3 weeks of morning visits that most of these offices were empty this early. The important people didn't show up until 9 or 10, which meant the building belonged to people like his D and the security guards and the early bird administrative assistants who seemed to run the world while everyone else slept. Jake turned left, walked past several closed doors, paused at one that stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could see a room different from the offices. This one had soft lighting and colorful posters on the walls showing cartoon animals in various poses. In the center of the room sat two girls in wheelchairs. They weren't moving, weren't talking, just sitting there like statues staring at nothing with eyes that seemed too old for their faces. Jake knew he should probably leave. His dad always said not to bother people who were working or doing therapy or whatever important adult things adults did. But something about those girls made him pause. They looked sad. Not regular sad like when you dropped your ice cream cone. Deeper sad. The kind of sad Jake had felt after his mom died when the world seemed gray and far away, and nothing anybody said made any difference. The door was already open. That meant it was okay to look right, not to bother anyone, just to see Jake push the door open a little wider. Neither girl reacted. They just kept staring straight ahead like he wasn't even there. An adult, probably a doctor or therapist or some other professional person, stood near the back of the room talking on his phone. He glanced at Jake, seemed to assess whether this kid was going to cause problems, then turned back to his conversation. Jake took that as permission. He stepped fully into the room. The girls still didn't look at him. Jake studied them openly the way kids do before they learn that staring is rude. They were definitely twins, identical in every way, except Sophie had a small scar on her left cheek, and Emma's hair was pulled back in a ponytail while Sophie's hung loose. Jake had never met anyone in a wheelchair before. His school had one kid who used crutches sometimes, but wheelchairs were different. These weren't regular wheelchairs either. They had motors and control panels and looked expensive in the way everything in this building looked expensive. He noticed their hands. Both girls had their hands clenched in their laps, fingers tight, like they were holding onto something invisible. Jake spoke without thinking, his voice pitched at normal conversation volume, not the careful, quiet voice adults used around sad people. "Hi, I'm Jake. What are your names?" Silence. The kind of silence that felt heavy, like it was pressing down from the ceiling. Jake tried again. "I like your wheelchairs." They look fast. Can you race them? Still nothing, but something shifted in Emma's expression so slight that most people would have missed it. Her eyes moved just a fraction, tracking toward Jake's face before returning to their thousand-yard stare. Jake didn't know what to make of that. He'd expected them to answer or to tell him to go away, or literally anything besides this weird frozen silence. But he remembered what his dad always said about people who were hurting. Sometimes folks need you to just be near them without needing anything back. So Jake did what came naturally. He sat down on the floor near Emma's wheelchair, cross-legged, and pulled his pencil from his pocket. He started drawing on the back of his math homework, the side where he had already messed up the long division. He drew a T-Rex, his specialty. The neck probably wasn't anatomically correct, and the arms were definitely too long, but it looked cool, and that's what mattered. After 5 minutes of drawing, Jake sensed rather than saw Sophie's attention shift toward him. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge it, just kept drawing, adding scales to the dinosaur's back and teeth to its massive jaw. When he finally glanced up, Sophie's eyes were fixed on his paper, not just looking, actually focused, interested. Jake's heart did a little skip. Progress. He kept his voice casual. You want to see I'm not done yet, but it's getting pretty good. Sophie didn't respond verbally, but her wheelchair moved, just an inch or two, powered by the control panel under her right hand. Closer to Jake, closer to the drawing. Jake smiled, not a big smile, just a normal kid smile, the kind that said, cool, we're doing something together now, without making a huge deal about it. He pulled a green marker from his pocket. He always carried markers, because you never knew when you'd need to draw something, and held it out towards Sophie. Want to color the trees in the background? I'm terrible at trees. Sophie's hand moved, slow, hesitant, like she was reaching through water instead of air. Her fingers touched the marker, closed around it. Emma made a sound, not a word, not even a formed sound. Just a small exhalation that might have been surprise or interest or the beginning of something larger. Jake heard footsteps behind him. He knew without looking that his dad had found him, had probably been watching from the doorway for who knew how long. Marcus's voice came quiet. Jake, time to. He stopped mid-sentence. Jake glanced back and saw his dad's face doing that thing it did when he was thinking hard about something, when all the gears in his brain were turning and he was processing information at lightning speed. Marcus stood completely still in the doorway. His eyes moved from Jake to Sophie to Emma, taking in the scene with the kind of attention most people never managed. The moment stretched. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Emma turned her head. Slow, deliberate. She looked directly at Marcus. Not through him, not past him, at him. Her eyes held questions, or maybe recognition, or maybe just the faint spark of something that had been dormant for 4 years finally flickering back to life. Marcus held her gaze. His expression stayed neutral, professional. The face of someone who understood that sudden movements or excessive reaction could shatter this fragile moment. He gave Emma a small nod, the kind of nod that said, I see you. I recognize that you're a person, not a problem. Then he looked at Jake. 5 more minutes, buddy. Then we need to go. Marcus withdrew from the doorway, gave them space, gave the moment room to breathe. Jake turned back to the twins and grinned. Okay, so trees. I was thinking maybe a forest with the T-Rex hunting. Do dinosaurs hunt in forests or plains? I can never remember. Sophie's hand, still holding the green marker, moved toward Jake's paper. The movement was shaky, uncertain, like she'd forgotten how to coordinate her muscles for this particular task. But she was trying. That's what mattered. Emma watched her sister with an intensity that suggested she was willing Sophie to succeed through sheer force of concentration. Jake kept talking, kept narrating his artistic process, keeping up a stream of chatter that required no response but invited participation. His dad had taught him that, though Jake didn't know he was doing it, just being present, just existing alongside someone else's pain without trying to fix it. The marker touched paper. Sophie made a mark, then another. The motions were clumsy but recognizable as an attempt at a tree trunk. Jake's smile widened. That's perfect. Way better than I could do. Do you want to add leaves? I have a darker green that might look cool for shadows. Behind them, visible through the half-open door, Marcus Wade stood in the hallway pretending to organize cleaning supplies in his cart. but his eyes kept drifting back to the therapy room, back to the two girls who hadn't moved or spoken or shown interest in anything for 4 years, back to the small miracle happening on his son's homework paper. Over the next 3 days, Marcus began keeping notes. Not official notes, not the kind of detailed documentation he'd maintained as a therapist. Just observations jotted into his phone during lunch breaks, patterns cataloged in the margins of his consciousness. Emma responds to male voices more readily than female, specifically deeper registers. The physical therapist who visited yesterday was female soprano range. Emma went rigid. But when Bob from maintenance walked past the open therapy room door, talking to Marcus about the elevator maintenance schedule, Emma's head turned. Track the sound. Sophie's breathing changes when she's startled. Not into panic, into control, like she's learned to regulate her stress response through deliberate breathing patterns. Someone taught her that, or she taught herself. Either way, it's sophisticated for a 9-year-old. Both girls calmer in early morning, before the building fills with people, before their mother arrives. That last observation settled in Marcus's gut like a stone. He'd been around enough trauma to recognize avoidance behavior when he saw it. The question was whether the girls were avoiding the general stress of crowds and noise, or whether they were avoiding someone specific. Marcus had his suspicions. He'd seen Victoria Chen pass her daughters in the hallway yesterday morning, seen the way Emma's entire body went taut, the way Sophie's hands clenched the armrests of her wheelchair hard enough to turn her knuckles white. He'd also seen Victoria's face in the split second before she locked down her expression. The raw anguish there quickly buried beneath layers of CEO composure. This wasn't a case of neglectful parenting. This was a case of mother and daughters trapped in a trauma loop, each triggering the other's worst responses, unable to break the cycle without help. Marcus knew he should mind his own business. He was a maintenance worker. He cleaned floors. His job description didn't include psychological assessment of his employer's family situation. But the therapist in him, the part of himself he tried to bury alongside Claire, kept surfacing, kept analyzing, kept seeing the patterns that others missed. He was organizing cleaning supplies in the maintenance closet when Jake appeared at his elbow, having finished his homework earlier than usual. "Dad, yeah, buddy. Why don't Emma and Sophie talk?" Marcus set down the bottle of floor cleaner he'd been pretending to examine. "What makes you think they can't?" "I didn't say can't, I said don't. There's a difference." Smart kid. Too smart sometimes. Marcus crouched to Jake's eye level. "You're right, there is a difference. Some people stay quiet because they forgot how to make words. Other people stay quiet because they don't feel safe making words. You think Emma and Sophie feel safe." Jake considered this with the seriousness of a judge deliberating a verdict. "I don't know. Maybe not with grown-ups, but with me, they seemed okay. Sophie held the marker I gave you, and Emma watched us draw. She wanted to, but she didn't." "Why do you think she wanted to, but didn't?" "Because of the way she looked at the paper, like when I want to eat the last cookie, but I know I shouldn't because you said only one after dinner." Jake paused. Also, her finger was tapping, like she was trying to say something without words. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Pride, maybe, or recognition. His 7-year-old son had just provided a more insightful assessment than most trained observers would manage. "That's really smart, Jake. Really observant." "I learned from watching you." The words landed with unexpected weight. Marcus hadn't realized Jake was paying that much attention, was cataloging not just what Marcus did, but how he approached the world and the people in it. Marcus pulled Jake into a hug. "You're a good kid. Best thing I ever did." Jake hugged back fierce and tight. "Can I see them again tomorrow? Emma and Sophie. If they're in the therapy room when you arrive, and if the door's open, and if you promise to leave, if any adult tells you to." "I promise." Jake scampered off to finish his math problems. Marcus returned to his cleaning supplies, but his mind was elsewhere. The pattern was becoming clear. Emma and Sophie weren't suffering from irreversible neurological damage. They were suffering from selective mutism triggered by severe trauma. Their bodies had learned to associate speaking with danger, with disappointment, with the moment when everything in their world had shattered. Breaking that association required patience, required creating environments where speaking felt safe, required building trust with people who didn't pressure or demand or need them to perform. Required exactly the kind of intervention Marcus had spent 8 years perfecting before he'd walked away from it all. He could help these girls. He knew he could. The old protocols he'd developed were still valid, still effective. He could see the path forward with crystal clarity, small exposures to safe communication partners gradually expanding their comfort zone, addressing the maternal relationship triggers last instead of first building confidence through. Marcus caught himself. Stop the cascade of therapeutic planning that had been his default mental state for nearly a decade. He wasn't their therapist. He was a maintenance worker who happened to notice things. That's all. That's all he could allow himself to be. The cost of caring more than that was too high. He'd learned that lesson in a hospital room with Claire's hand going cold in his, while machines beeped their helpless alarms. Richard Vance occupied an office 3 doors down from his half-sister's corner suite. The space was smaller, the view less impressive, the furniture chosen from the same expensive catalog, but in the colors that suggested executive rather than CEO. Every detail reminded him that he was second, that he'd been born first but arrived second, that he'd worked longer but been promoted slower, that his name was on the building but not on the letterhead. He stood at his window now, watching the morning light paint Chicago's downtown in shades of gold and shadow. Behind him, his laptop displayed the quarterly reports he'd compiled, the strategic analyses he'd drafted, the recommendations he'd developed for board review. All of it would be filtered through Victoria, presented to the board with her commentary. Approved or rejected based on her vision for the company. Their father had built the company that should have been Richard's legacy instead of his consolation prize. His desk phone rang. Richard didn't move to answer it. 3 rings, 4. His assistant would pick up, screen the call, transfer it if necessary. He heard her voice through his partially open door, professional and crisp. "Mr. Vance's office. May I ask who's calling?" Pause. "1 moment, please." His assistant appeared in the doorway. "Sir, it's the private investigator. He says it's regarding the inquiry you submitted last week." Richard glanced at his watch. 9:47. Early for a call, which suggested the investigator had found something worth reporting ahead of schedule. "Put him through." He waited until his assistant retreated before lifting the receiver. "This is Vance." The voice on the other end was professionally neutral, the tone of someone who'd learned not to editorialize about his findings. "Mr. Vance, I have the preliminary background on Marcus Wade." "Go ahead." "Interesting case. His employment application lists various custodial and security positions over the past 2 years. Prior to that significant gap in employment, before the gap, he was Dr. Marcus Wade, Johns Hopkins educated, master's in pediatric rehabilitation therapy, published researcher, worked at Children's Memorial Hospital, Chicago, until approximately 25 months ago." Richard's hand tightened on the phone. Why would a pediatric therapist be working as a janitor? According to hospital records, his wife died during childbirth. Stroke. He took leave, never returned. Let his clinical license lapse. Seems he walked away from the profession entirely. Any indication why he's here, at Chen Industries specifically? Nothing concrete. Could be coincidence, or could be he knows about your nieces. Their case was publicized enough that anyone in pediatric trauma circles would have heard about it. Richard processed this information with the strategic calculation that had made him invaluable to Chen Industries, even as it kept him in his half-sister's shadow. "What's your assessment? Is he dangerous?" "Depends on your definition. Dangerous as in violent. No indicators. Dangerous as in potentially manipulative. That's harder to call. A man with his credentials working custodial jobs either ran out of options or he's pursuing an agenda that requires access to specific environments. Keep digging. I want to know everywhere he's worked since leaving the hospital. Everyone he's talked to, and I want to know if he's had any contact with my nieces beyond what his job requires." "Understood. I'll have a full report by end of week." Richard hung up, turned back to the window. 3 days ago, he'd noticed Marcus Wade lingering near the therapy suite. Yesterday, he'd seen Jake Wade, the custodian's son, inside the therapy room with Emma and Sophie. This morning, building security had mentioned in their daily report that Marcus had accessed the maintenance storage room at unusual hours, staying longer than typical supply restocking required. Individually, these details meant nothing. Collectively, they suggested someone paying attention to things that weren't his concern. Richard opened a drawer in his desk. Inside was a folder he'd compiled over the past 4 years. Newspaper clippings about the accident, police reports, insurance documents, medical records, and one other thing, a spreadsheet tracking payments made through an offshore account to a law firm in Nevada, the firm that had represented the drunk driver, the firm that had secured his release on a technicality and facilitated his disappearance before he could testify in any civil proceedings. Richard had told himself for 4 years that hiring that driver had been a calculated business move. A way to create a minor scandal that would damage Victoria's reputation, make her seem like a negligent mother who prioritized work over family. Nothing serious, just a fender bender. Just enough to plant doubts in the board's mind about her judgment. He hadn't known the driver would panic, hadn't known the man would accelerate instead of brake, hadn't known that what should have been a minor collision would turn into the worst day of his niece's lives. He told himself he wasn't responsible. The driver had made his own choices. The alcohol was the driver's fault. The panic was the driver's fault. But Richard's money had put that particular driver in that particular car on that particular day. His money had made the accident possible. That knowledge sat in his chest like cancer growing quietly, eating him from the inside out. And now this janitor was paying attention to Emma and Sophie. This janitor with a background in exactly the kind of therapy Victoria had spent millions on without result. If Marcus Wade succeeded where all those expensive specialists failed, if he gave Victoria back her daughter's voices, then Victoria would become what she'd always been, the golden child. The visionary, the one who overcome impossible odds, and Richard would remain what he'd always been, the reliable second choice. The steady operations guy, the man who kept the machinery running while his younger sister claimed all the glory. He couldn't allow that. He'd already lost too much to Victoria's brilliance. He wouldn't lose this too. Richard picked up his desk phone again, dialed a different number this time. A number that wasn't in his contacts list, that existed only in his memory. "It's me. I need you to look into someone. Marcus Wade, former occupation, family, everything. And check his connection to pediatric medicine." The voice on the other end asked why. Richard's response came flat empty of emotion. "Because I don't believe in coincidences, and I need to know if he's a problem that needs solving." Maria Santos had worked custodial services at Chen Industries for 12 years. She'd seen 3 CEOs, 2 corporate restructures, and countless young hotshots flame out trying to climb the executive ladder too fast. She'd also perfected the art of knowing everything about everyone without seeming to pay attention. Marcus had learned within his first week that Maria was the person to know. She could tell you which executives were having affairs, which board members were angling to retire, and where to find the best coffee in a 5-block radius. She was also Jake's unofficial grandmother during his morning visits, always having a juice box or granola bar stashed in her cart, always willing to quiz him on his multiplication tables while Marcus finished his routes. They were in the break room now, mid-morning, the time when Maria took her 15-minute break and Marcus usually checked on Jake between assignments. Trevor, the new kid, who'd been hired 2 weeks ago, was there too, eating a sandwich despite it being nowhere near lunch. Maria was in storytelling mode, which meant everyone within earshot was about to get an earful. Whether they wanted it or not, 4 years now, those poor babies. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Trevor looked up from his sandwich. "What happened? I just started last month." "Car accident. Mrs. Chen was in some merger meeting, couldn't drive her daughters to ballet class herself. Hired a driver through one of those fancy services. Professional drivers, background checks, the whole 9 yards. Except this one was drunk. Ran a red light near the construction zone on Michigan Avenue. Got T-boned by a semi." Jake, who'd been coloring quietly at his usual table, stopped, moving. Marcus saw his son's shoulders tense, saw the way the crayon froze mid-stroke. Trevor shook his head. "Jesus. They survive, barely. Medevac to Northwestern. Doctors said 50-50 whether they'd make it through the night. Spinal injuries, traumatic brain injury, the works." Maria lowered her voice, but not enough that Jake wouldn't hear. Marcus considered intervening, pulling his son from the room, but Jake needed to learn that the world was full of sadness, and sheltering him from every painful story wouldn't prepare him for reality. Besides, Jake already knew about car accidents and hospitals and the way life could change in an instant. He'd lived through it when Claire died. Maria continued, but here's the thing that always bothered me. The driver. He disappeared right after. DUI vehicular assault, the whole book should have been thrown at him. But he lawyers up with some expensive firm, nobody knows how he afforded, and suddenly the charges get reduced. Then he vanishes. Case goes cold. Marcus felt his attention sharpen. How does someone vanish in the middle of a criminal case? That's what I want to know. And the cameras at that intersection, the ones that should have caught the whole thing, malfunctioned that day. Convenient, right? Trevor whistled low. That's sketchy as hell. Very sketchy. And you know who handled the internal investigation? Maria paused for dramatic effect. Mr. Vance, Mrs. Chen's brother. He personally reviewed everything, talked to all the witnesses, coordinated with the police department, then declared it was a straightforward case of drunk driving, nothing more to investigate. Marcus kept his voice casual, but his mind was already working. Vance is her brother, half-brother technically. Same father, different mothers. He's COO, been with the company since it was just him and their dad running operations out of a warehouse in Naperville. Built this place from nothing. Then Victoria comes back from Harvard with her fancy MBA, and Boom Daddy makes her CEO. Richard gets kicked down to COO. She said it like that, explained everything, and maybe it did. Jake's voice, small and uncertain, broke into the conversation. Dad, Emma, and Sophie were in a car accident. All the adults turned to look at him. Marcus saw his son's face, pale and drawn, the way it got when he was processing something that scared him. Marcus crossed to Jake's table, knelt beside him. Yeah, buddy, they were. That's why they don't talk. It's part of it. Jake's eyes held too much understanding for a 7-year-old. Mom stopped talking, too, before she, you know. The room went silent. Maria's expression shifted from gossip mode to genuine sympathy. Even Trevor, who barely knew them, looked uncomfortable. Marcus pulled Jake into a hug, holding his son, while the memories of Claire's final days washed over both of them. She'd had 2 months in various stages of consciousness between the stroke and her death. Toward the end, words had become impossible. She'd communicate through eye movements, hand squeezes, the occasional grunt or moan that Marcus learned to interpret. He had spent those 2 months simultaneously being a new father to a premature infant and around-the-clock caregiver to his dying wife. He'd used every therapeutic technique he'd mastered on Claire, trying to help her recover language, trying to give her back the ability to tell him she loved him, or that she was in pain, or that she was afraid. None of it had worked. The stroke had taken too much, left too little behind. When she'd finally died, part of Marcus had felt relief. Not because he'd wanted her gone, but because watching her struggle had been unbearable. Because knowing his expertise wasn't enough to save her had been destroying him from the inside out. He'd never admitted that relief to anyone. The guilt of feeling relieved that your wife was dead was the kind of thing you carried alone. Marcus released Jake, keeping his hands on his son's shoulders. Emma and Sophie aren't dying. They're just quiet. And sometimes people need time to find their words again. But they will. I think they will. Jake studied his father's face with the unnerving perception kids sometimes have. You're going to help them, aren't you? Like you used to help other kids. I don't know. That's not my job anymore. But you could. Marcus didn't answer. The truth was, yes, he could. The truth was he'd been mentally drafting intervention protocols since the day Jake had first interacted with the twins. The truth was the therapist in him would never fully die, no matter how hard he tried to bury it. But the truth was also that he'd failed Claire, failed spectacularly. And the thought of failing someone else's children, of giving them hope, only to watch them slip away, like Claire, had made him want to run. Maria's voice broke the silence gentler now. You know what I think? I think those girls are lucky you're here. Your boy's already getting through to them. I seen it myself walking past that therapy room. They look at Jake like he's the first interesting thing they've encountered in years. Jake's not a trained professional. No, but he's a kid who knows what it's like to hurt. That's worth more than all the degrees in the world. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to explain that childhood trauma recovery required structured intervention, consistent therapeutic relationship, careful titration of exposure to triggers. Wanted to say that being a nice kid who'd experienced loss wasn't qualification for helping severely traumatized children. But he looked at Jake, at his son's earnest face and hopeful eyes, and the arguments died in his throat. Maybe Maria was right. Maybe sometimes connection mattered more than credentials. Or maybe Marcus was just looking for an excuse to do what he'd been trained to do, what he'd loved doing before Claire's death had taught him that love and skill and desperate effort sometimes weren't enough to save the people you cared about. That night, Victoria Chen stood outside her daughter's bedroom door for the third time that week. She'd come home at 8:30 later than she'd intended, but earlier than usual. The penthouse felt cavernous and cold despite the expensive furniture and carefully curated art. Linda, the night nurse, was reading to Emma and Sophie. Victoria could hear her voice through the door, gentle and practiced, narrating some story about princesses or adventures or whatever children were supposed to enjoy. Did her daughters enjoy it? Victoria didn't know. She'd hired Linda 2 years ago and trusted her to know what 9-year-old girls needed. Trusted her in the same way she trusted everyone she employed, by paying them well and expecting excellence without needing to micromanage the details. Except this wasn't micromanagement. This was motherhood. And Victoria had outsourced it to competent professionals because she couldn't bear to face her own failures. Her hand touched the doorknob. Cool metal under her palm. She could turn it, walk in, sit on the edge of Emma's bed or Sophie's bed, and join the story in progress. But the memory of yesterday morning stopped her. The way Emma had flinched when Victoria's heels clicked past the therapy room. The way Sophie had turned her face away, jaw clenched, whole body radiating rejection. They didn't want her there. Her presence caused them pain. So Victoria did what she'd done every night for 4 years. She stood outside the door listening to someone else comfort her children and told herself it was for the best. Inside the bedroom, Linda's voice rose and fell with practiced cadence, and they lived happily ever after. The end. A pause, then Linda's voice softer. Sleep well, sweethearts. Your mama loves you very much. Victoria's eyes burned. She pressed her palm against the door as close to touching her daughters as she could allow herself. Then she turned away, walked to her own bedroom, closed the door. In the dark alone, Victoria Chen allowed herself precisely 5 minutes of crying. No more. She had calls scheduled with Tokyo at 6 a.m. No time for extended grief. She set her alarm, took her sleeping pill, lay in bed staring at the ceiling while her mind cataloged everything she'd accomplished that day and everything she'd failed to address. The list of failures always included the same item at the top: Emma and Sophie. 4 years of specialists, 4 years of state-of-the-art therapy, 4 years of unlimited resources thrown at a problem that refused to be solved. And today, Marcus Wade, her janitor, had gotten her daughters to make eye contact, had gotten Sophie to pick up a marker, had gotten Emma to track his movements with something that looked almost like interest. A janitor with no medical degree, currently visible on his employment records, had done more in 3 weeks than Yale-educated neurologists had accomplished in 4 years. Victoria should fire him. The liability alone was staggering. An employee with undisclosed medical credentials working with vulnerable children without proper authorization or oversight. The lawsuits practically wrote themselves. But she wouldn't fire him. Couldn't. Because for the first time in 4 years, Victoria had seen something in her daughters' faces that looked like hope. And she'd cling to that hope even if it destroyed her. Even if it meant watching a janitor succeed where she'd failed. Even if it meant acknowledging that money and power and strategic planning couldn't fix everything. Sleep came eventually, chemically induced, dreamless as always. Victoria preferred it that way. Dreams meant variables. She couldn't control emotions. She couldn't manage scenarios where Emma and Sophie looked at her with trust instead of fear. Reality was easier. Reality she could handle. Or so she told herself. The next morning brought rain. Not the gentle, misting kind that made Chicago look romantic in movies. The heavy sheets that turned streets into rivers and made every step outside feel like wading through a car wash. Marcus arrived at work drenched despite his rain jacket. The overnight shift had finished early, leaving the building in that peculiar state of almost emptiness that comes before the morning rush. He changed into dry clothes in the maintenance room, started his route. The monotony of the work had become soothing over the past 3 weeks. Push the cart, check the supply levels, clean what needed cleaning, exist in the margins of important people's important lives. At 7:45, Jake arrived. Marcus met him at the employee entrance with a towel and dry socks from the emergency supplies Linda kept in the medical suite. Jake accepted both with a gap-toothed grin. It's raining cats and dogs out there. Where'd you learn that phrase? Mrs. Morrison. She says a lot of weird old people things. Marcus ruffled his son's wet hair. Well, she's right this time. Go dry off in the break room. I'll bring breakfast in 10 minutes. Jake scampered off. Marcus continued his route. The therapy suite door stood open, unusual for this hour. Marcus slowed his cart, glancing inside without making his observation obvious. Dr. Morrison was there early, reorganizing supplies, and sitting in their usual positions, already dressed and ready, despite the hour, were Emma and Sophie. Marcus's professional assessment kicked in automatically. Early arrival suggested disrupted home routine. Rain often triggered anxiety in trauma patients. The girl's body language, shoulders hunched, hands clenched, indicated elevated stress. He made a decision, knocked lightly on the doorframe. Dr. Morrison looked up. Yes. Morning, just checking if you need anything. Coffee, supplies, whatever. We're fine, thank you. But Marcus wasn't talking to Dr. Morrison. He was talking to Emma and Sophie, using the doctor as a socially acceptable excuse to enter their space. He pushed his cart just inside the doorway, started wiping down the windowsill with deliberate slowness. Dr. Morrison returned to his supply organization. Marcus kept working, maintaining peripheral awareness of the twins. After 30 seconds, Sophie's wheelchair moved, just a fraction, toward Marcus. He didn't react, just kept wiping the same spot over and over, buying time. Then Emma's chair moved too, smaller movement, more tentative. Marcus risked a glance. Both girls were watching him now, not staring, not demanding attention, just observing with the careful assessment of animals deciding whether to approach or flee. He made his voice deliberately casual. Rough morning for Rain. You two get here okay? No response. Expected. Marcus continued. My son Jake, he hates rain, says it makes everything gray and sad. I told him rain is just the sky taking a shower. Gotta stay clean, right? The joke was terrible. The kind of dad joke that makes kids groan and adults question your sense of humor. But Sophie's mouth twitched. Just barely. The ghost of a smile. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. The professional distance he'd been maintaining, the walls he'd built to protect himself from caring too much, and all of it, shifted just slightly. These girls weren't case studies, weren't symptoms to be managed or protocols to be implemented. They were kids. Scared kids who'd had their world destroyed and were trying to figure out how to exist in what remained. He knew that feeling, had lived it, still lived it some days when missing Claire felt like drowning. Dr. Morrison's phone rang. He stepped out of the room to take the call, leaving Marcus alone with Emma and Sophie for the first time. The air in the room changed, became heavier, more charged. Marcus set down his cleaning cloth, turned to face the girls fully. He spoke quietly, just above a whisper. I know you can understand me. I know you are not broken. I know you're waiting. Emma's eyes widened. Sophie's breathing hitched. Marcus kept going. I don't know what you're waiting for. Maybe you're waiting to feel safe. Maybe you're waiting for someone to give you permission to speak again. Maybe you're waiting to see if the world is still as scary as it was the day everything changed. He paused, let the words settle. Here's what I want you to know. The world is still scary sometimes. People still disappoint each other. Bad things still happen to people who don't deserve them. But you're not alone in that. You're never going to be alone in that. Emma's hand moved, reached towards Sophie. Sophie took her sister's hand. Marcus felt his throat tighten, forced himself to continue. And whenever you're ready to make sounds again, words or not words, doesn't matter. There are people who'll listen. My son Jake, he's good at listening. Me, I'm okay at it too. Maybe even your mom if you give her a chance. The mention of their mother created an immediate shift. Both girls tensed. Their hands gripped each other tighter. Marcus filed that reaction away. Important data. The maternal relationship was the core trauma, or at least adjacent to it. Dr. Morrison's voice filtered in from the hallway, still on his phone call. Marcus knew he had maybe 30 seconds before the doctor returned. He made his last statement count. You don't have to be ready today, or tomorrow, or next week. But when you are ready, we'll be here. All of us, waiting for you to come back. He picked up his cleaning cloth, returned to the windowsill, resumed his methodical wiping like the last 2 minutes hadn't happened. Dr. Morrison returned, sorry about that. Emergency with another patient. No problem, all done here. Marcus pushed his cart toward the door, didn't look back at Emma and Sophie, didn't need to. He could feel their eyes on him, could feel the weight of what he'd just promised them. He'd meant every word. That was the terrifying part. He was invested now. Couldn't pretend otherwise. Couldn't hide behind the excuse of being just a janitor who noticed things. He was Marcus Wade again. Dr. Marcus Wade. The man who'd built his career on helping voiceless children find their voices. The man who'd failed his wife when she needed him most. He pushed his cart toward the break room where Jake waited, wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or finally doing something that mattered again. Behind him in the therapy suite, Emma turned to Sophie. Mouthed 2 words, no sound. Sophie saw them, understood them. The words were, he knows. 3 days passed in a rhythm Marcus recognized from his old life. The rhythm of careful observation. The rhythm of building trust through consistency rather than grand gestures. The rhythm of letting traumatized children set the pace while adults maintained steady presence in the background. Each morning, Marcus arrived at 6:15, positioned his cart near the therapy suite, made himself visible but not intrusive. He hummed while he worked old blues melodies his father had taught him, the kind of low-register sounds that traveled through walls without demanding attention. The first morning, Emma tracked him through the open doorway. The second morning, Sophie's wheelchair inched closer to where he cleaned. The third morning, both girls were waiting when he arrived, positioned so they could see the hallway, see him, without Dr. Morrison noticing their vigil. Marcus understood what they were doing. Testing, verifying, making sure the man who'd promised to wait was actually waiting. He kept his promises. He knew from experience that trust once shattered required meticulous reconstruction. Every broken promise added another layer of scar tissue. Every kept promise chipped away at the calcification. Jake had become part of the routine too. He'd arrive at 7:45, eat his breakfast, then wander to the therapy suite with his drawings and markers and that particular brand of 7-year-old confidence that didn't recognize impossible situations. Dr. Morrison had stopped objecting to Jake's presence. The doctor wasn't blind. He'd noticed the way Emma and Sophie oriented toward the boy, the way their stress indicators decreased, when Jake sat cross-legged on their floor talking about dinosaurs or space travel, or whatever captured his imagination that morning. On the 4th day, something shifted. Jake was showing Emma a picture he'd drawn, some elaborate battle scene involving dragons and knights in what might have been a spaceship, but could also have been a castle. The proportions were unclear when Emma's hand moved. Not to touch the picture, to take the marker Jake offered, her fingers closed around it, trembling, uncertain, but deliberate. Marcus watched from the hallway, pretending to sort cleaning supplies, while every nerve in his body focused on that small hand, that green marker, that monumental moment of connection. Emma brought the marker to Jake's paper, made a mark, just one, a short green line that could have been grass or a horizon or nothing at all. Jake's reaction wasn't perfect. He didn't make a big deal, didn't announce it, just smiled and offered another color. Nice, want to try blue? I need an ocean over here. Sophie made a sound, not a word, a small grunt of what might have been frustration or encouragement, or both. Emma looked at her sister. Sophie looked back. Something passed between them, some twin communication that operated on frequencies Marcus couldn't access. Then Emma made another mark, blue this time, longer, more confident. Marcus pulled out his phone, opened his notes, typed quickly while his hands were still steady. Day 4. Emma initiates physical action drawing in Jake's presence. Sophie vocalizes nonverbal sound in response, both demonstrating increased comfort with peer interaction. Maternal figure still not present during progress. Moment's significant pattern. He documented hundreds of cases during his years as a therapist. The notes had always come easily, clinical observations filtered through professional distance. But these notes felt different, personal, like he was documenting his own son's recovery as much as Emma and Sophie's. Footsteps echoed from the executive corridor. Victoria's footsteps, unmistakable in their sharp precision. Marcus knew what would happen next. He'd seen this pattern for 4 days now. Victoria would approach the therapy suite, would pause at the doorway, would observe her daughters from a distance, face carefully neutral, would turn away without entering. The girls would sense her presence before seeing her, would tense, would retreat into the frozen stillness that had become their default state around their mother. The cycle would repeat, day after day, mother and daughters trapped in mutual pain, unable to bridge the gap between them. Marcus made a decision that would either change everything or destroy what little progress had been made. He stepped into Victoria's path. She stopped abruptly, irritation flashing across her face before the CEO mask snapped back into place. Her voice came cold professional. "Excuse me." Marcus didn't move. "Mrs. Chen, I need to speak with you about your daughters." Victoria's expression shifted. Confusion replaced irritation. Confusion mixed with something that might have been hope, if hope could survive 4 years of disappointment. "Who are you to Marcus Wade? I know who you are. You're the custodian, the one who's been hovering near my daughter's therapy sessions for the past week." So she'd noticed. Of course she'd noticed. Victoria Chen didn't miss details. Marcus kept his voice steady. "I'm also a former pediatric rehabilitation therapist. Johns Hopkins, 8 years specializing in trauma-induced communication disorders. I recognize what I'm seeing in Emma and Sophie, and it's not what everyone thinks." Victoria's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, anger, calculation. She glanced around the hallway, assessing who might overhear this conversation. "My office now." Victoria's office felt like a museum exhibit on corporate power. Everything precisely arranged. Nothing personal except that single photograph frame Marcus glimpsed before Victoria closed her desk drawer with a sharp click. She positioned herself behind the desk. Power position, control position. Marcus remained standing, despite her gesture toward the visitor's chair. He'd learned long ago that accepting the subordinate seat meant accepting the subordinate role. Victoria's first question came sharp as broken glass. "You lied on your employment application." "I omitted. There's a difference." "Is there? You represented yourself as a custodian with various security and maintenance experience. You failed to mention the medical degree." "Master's degree, and I didn't fail to mention it. I chose not to include it because it's no longer relevant to my professional life." Victoria leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Why not?" "Because my wife died. Because I spent 6 months trying to rehabilitate her after a peripartum stroke, using every technique I'd mastered, and none of it made a damn bit of difference. Because watching her slip away while I held a useless degree in fixing the unfixable destroyed my ability to walk into another therapy room and tell another family I could help them." The words came out harder than Marcus intended, the wound still fresh despite 2 years of distance. Claire's ghost still lived in his voice whenever he talked about her haunting the spaces between syllables. Victoria's expression softened microscopically. "I'm sorry for your loss. Are you calculating whether my personal trauma makes me a liability or an asset in dealing with your daughters?" The bluntness clearly caught her off guard. CEOs weren't used to custodians speaking to them like equals. "I'm trying to understand your motivation. Why hide your credentials? Why work here specifically? Why pay attention to my children?" Marcus finally sat, not in submission, but because this conversation required the kind of honesty that didn't work from a standing position. "I didn't plan this. I needed work. Chen Industries was hiring. The pay was decent. The hours worked with my son's schedule. That's it. No conspiracy, no agenda." "But now you're paying attention to Emma and Sophie." "Because I can't help it. You put someone with my background in proximity to traumatized children, and it's like asking a mechanic not to notice when your car makes a weird noise. I see the patterns. I understand what's happening, and I can't just ignore it." Victoria stood, walked to the windows overlooking Chicago. Her silhouette against the morning light made her look smaller than her reputation suggested. "What do you see when you look at my daughters?" Marcus chose his words with surgical precision. "I see two children who aren't physiologically incapable of speech. I see selective mutism triggered by severe trauma. I see a classic avoidance pattern where the triggering stimulus isn't the accident itself, but the emotional architecture surrounding it." In English, "Your daughters can speak. They're choosing not to. And the reason they're choosing not to has less to do with physical trauma and more to do with who they're afraid of disappointing. Victoria turned sharply. They're not afraid of you. They're afraid of disappointing you. Every time you come near them, their stress responses spike. Heart rate, respiration, muscle tension. Classic indicators of anxiety triggered by specific stimulus. The stimulus is you. The words landed like physical blows. Victoria's hand gripped the window frame. That's not, the specialist said it was PTSD from the accident. It is PTSD, but trauma isn't just about the event. It's about the meaning children assign to the event. Emma and Sophie's 4-year-old brains couldn't process why you weren't there when they screamed for you. They couldn't understand board meetings or corporate responsibility or any of the adult complexities. They only understood that they needed their mother and she didn't come. I came as soon as I heard, but not soon enough, not in their perception. And now every time they see you, they relive that moment of abandonment. So they shut down. Because speaking means engaging. Engaging means risking disappointment. It's safer to stay silent. Victoria's shoulders shook. She pressed her forehead against the glass. Every doctor said they might never speak again, that the trauma had damaged something irreversible. The doctors were wrong, or they were treating the symptom instead of the cause. Physical therapy can't fix psychological wounds, and psychological therapy can't work if the primary trigger keeps reinforcing the trauma loop. Silence stretched between them. Outside Chicago continued its morning routine, oblivious to the conversation reshaping 2 lives on the 42nd floor. Victoria's voice came out broken. Can you help them? I don't have a license anymore. I can't officially practice. I'm not asking as a CEO hiring a consultant. I'm asking as a mother begging someone who understands what nobody else seems to understand. Marcus thought about all the reasons to say no, the liability, the personal risk, the possibility of failing these children the way he'd failed Claire, the certainty that getting emotionally invested would crack open the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his grief. He thought about Jake's question. You're going to help them, aren't you? He thought about Emma's hand taking that marker. Sophie's small grunt of encouragement, the way both girls watched him like he might be the first adult in 4 years who actually saw them. The words came out before he could stop them. I'll help, but you need to understand what that means. I'll work with them my way, which means no pressure, no timelines, no expectations of immediate results. It means you have to step back. Be less present, not more. Give them space to heal without the constant reminder of what they've lost. You want me to avoid my own children? I want you to stop triggering their trauma response, temporarily, until we can rebuild their association with you from threat to safety. Victoria turned from the window. Her face showed every one of her 34 years, plus several more borrowed from stress and guilt. How long? I don't know. Trauma healing isn't linear. Could be weeks. Could be months. And if it doesn't work, if you fail like everyone else has failed, Marcus met her eyes. Then I fail, and you'll have lost nothing except time. But I don't think I'll fail, because unlike everyone else, I understand that your daughters aren't broken. They're protecting themselves. And once they feel safe enough to stop protecting themselves, they'll come back. Victoria pulled a tissue from her desk drawer, wiped her eyes with sharp, efficient movements. What do you need from me? Distance, trust, and the flexibility to adjust my work schedule around their therapy sessions. My son comes first always. If there's ever a conflict between helping your daughters and being present for Jake, Jake wins. Done. That easily. Victoria's smile held no humor. Mr. Wade, I've spent 4 years and approximately $7 million trying to fix my daughters. I've hired the best specialists in the country. None of them have gotten Emma to pick up a marker. Your 7-year-old son accomplished that in a week. So yes, that easily. She walked back to her desk, pulled out a business card, wrote something on the back. My personal cell, day or night. You see something I need to know, you call. Marcus took the card, noted the slight tremor in Victoria's hand as she released it. She wasn't the Ice Queen the staff called her. She was a terrified mother wearing an Ice Queen costume because terror looked like weakness, and weakness got you destroyed in her world. He understood that impulse. He'd been wearing his own costume for 2 years. the costume of the capable single father who had everything under control when most days he felt like he was drowning. Marcus stood to leave, paused at the door. Mrs. Chen, one more thing. Your daughters need to know you love them, but they can't hear it from you right now. They need to hear it from someone else, someone they're starting to trust. You and Jake, and eventually others. We'll build a chorus of voices telling them they're valuable, they're seen, they matter. Until that message is loud enough to drown out the voice in their heads telling them they failed you. Victoria's composure cracked completely. She sat down hard in her chair, face in her hand. I never wanted them to feel like they failed me. I'm the one who failed them. Marcus could have left then, should have left. Maintaining professional boundaries meant not comforting your employer while she cried. But he wasn't a professional anymore. He was just a man who understood what it felt like to carry guilt that had no reasonable place to land. His voice came gentle. The best thing you can do for your daughters right now is forgive yourself. Because children sense their parents' self-hatred, and they absorb it. They make it their own. Emma and Sophie think you hate them because they can feel how much you hate yourself. Yeah. How do I stop hating myself for what I let happen to them? You remember that you're human, that you made a choice based on incomplete information, that you loved them before the accident and you love them now, and love doesn't require perfection. It just requires presence. Marcus left before Victoria could respond. He had cleaning duties to finish. He had a son to check on. He had a life to maintain that didn't include playing therapist to a CEO's broken family. Except he'd already agreed to play therapist, already committed himself to the kind of emotional investment that had destroyed him last time. The difference was that Emma and Sophie weren't dying. They were just lost. And Marcus had always been good at finding lost children. Richard Vance placed the phone call from his car parked 3 blocks from Chen Industries in a garage where building security cameras couldn't reach. The man he was calling didn't maintain an office, didn't advertise services, didn't exist in any searchable database. Perfect for situations requiring discretion. The voice that answered was professionally neutral, yes. It's Vance, subject is Marcus Wade. Background, confirmed former therapist credentials, legitimate wife deceased. But there's a development. I'm listening. My sister has authorized him to work with her daughters. Informally. No paperwork, no official capacity, but she's giving him access. He's going to be around them more. Close to them. You want me to intervene? Richard watched rain streak down his windshield. Watch people hurry past with umbrellas and briefcases and problems that probably seemed enormous to them, but were tiny compared to the weight Richard carried. Not yet. I want documentation. Photos of every interaction, timestamps, anything that could be construed as inappropriate contact or boundary violation. You're building a case. I'm protecting my nieces from a stranger with unclear motives and convenient timing. Your sister doesn't see it that way. My sister is desperate. Desperate people make bad decisions. I've spent 4 years watching her throw money at this problem. Now she's throwing trust at it. Trust in a man who's hiding his past and getting emotionally close to vulnerable children. The voice on the phone paused. When it spoke again, there was a question embedded in the statement. You're paying a lot for surveillance on someone you claim is just protecting your nieces. Richard's jaw tightened. He's a threat. To the children or to your sister's dependence on you? This conversation is over. One more question. The accident 4 years ago, the driver who disappeared. You want me to look into whether Marcus Wade has any connection to that situation? Richard's blood went cold. Why would he have any connection? Professional curiosity, strange coincidence, a rehabilitation therapist showing up right when 2 children need rehabilitation. Makes me wonder if he's been watching your family longer than you think. The thought hadn't occurred to Richard, but now that it had been planted, it grew roots. Look into it, discreetly. Always. The line went dead. Richard sat in his car watching rain turn Chicago's streets into rivers and wondered when exactly he'd become the kind of man who hired investigators to stalk janitors. The answer was 4 years ago, when he'd hired a drunk driver to cause a minor accident. When that minor accident had become a catastrophe. when his attempt to damage Victoria's reputation had instead destroyed his niece's lives. He'd thought the guilt would fade. It hadn't. It had metastasized, spreading through every thought, every decision, every moment of every day. And now Marcus Wade was going to undo the damage, was going to give Victoria back her daughter's voices, was going to make Victoria the hero again, the woman who overcame impossible odds, while Richard remained what he'd always been, the man who lived in her shadow. Richard started his car, drove back toward Chen Industries. He had meetings to attend, quarterly reports to present, the machinery of corporate success to maintain. But his mind stayed with Marcus Wade, with the threat he represented, with the questions that didn't have comfortable answers. Sarah Chen's therapy office occupied a brownstone in Lincoln Park, the kind of discreet professional space where Chicago's wealthy address their psychological demons without risking gossip. Victoria had been coming here for 3 months, had missed approximately half her scheduled appointments. Tonight she'd come directly from the office, still wearing her work armor, still carrying the weight of the conversation with Marcus Wade like a stone in her chest. Sarah looked up from her notes. "You made it. I wasn't sure you would." "I nearly didn't." "What changed your mind?" Victoria settled into the leather chair that had become familiar, despite her sporadic attendance. "Someone told me today that my daughters can sense my self-hatred, that they're absorbing it, making it their own." Sarah set down her pen with deliberate care. "Tell me about that conversation." So Victoria did. She explained about Marcus Wade, about his hidden credentials, about his brutal honesty regarding Emma and Sophie's condition, about the way he'd looked at her with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite judgment, but landed somewhere in between. Sarah listened without interrupting the way therapists did when they sensed something important breaking open. When Victoria finished, Sarah asked the question Victoria had been avoiding for 3 months. "Do you believe he's right, that you hate yourself?" "I don't know if I'd use the word hate." "What word would you use?" Victoria stared at her hands. They were shaking slightly, had been shaking since her conversation with Marcus. I despise myself for being in that meeting, for answering those emails, for prioritizing quarterly projections over a ballet recital. "You didn't know an accident would happen." "That's not the point. The point is I made a choice, kids or career. And I chose career. I always chose career." Well, Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Why?" "Because my mother chose career over me. Because I watched her become this titan of industry while I was raised by nannies and housekeepers and anyone except her. Because I swore I'd be different. I'd be present. I'd be the mother who showed up. But you didn't. I tried. God, I tried. But every time I was with them, I was thinking about work, about emails, about deals and strategies and everything except the 2 small people in front of me who needed my undivided attention." Victoria's voice cracked. She pressed her palms against her eyes. "And then the accident happened, and I got exactly what I'd been unconsciously wishing for. An excuse to focus entirely on work, to hide behind fixing them instead of being with them, to throw money at the problem instead of throwing myself at it. You think you wished for the accident? I think some dark part of me was relieved when it gave me permission to be the person I already was. The person who solves problems from a distance, who writes checks instead of providing comfort, who runs companies instead of raising daughters." Sarah's voice remained steady, clinical. "That's quite a confession. Is it wrong? Am I a monster for feeling relieved that my daughter's paralysis gave me an excuse to be absent? You're human. Humans have complicated reactions to tragedy. Relief doesn't mean you wanted them hurt. It means you found something manageable in an unmanageable situation." Victoria pulled her hands away from her face. Her makeup was destroyed, mascara tracking down her cheeks. "But they can feel it. Marcus was right. My daughters look at me and see someone who wishes they'd never been born. Someone who resents their existence because it complicated the career I actually cared about." "Is that true? Do you wish they'd never been born?" "No, God, no. I love them more than anything. More than the company, more than my reputation, more than my own life. I love them so much it physically hurts." "Then why can't you tell them that?" "Because I'm terrified they'll look at me the way they already look at me, like I'm a stranger who happens to share their DNA, Like I'm the woman who abandoned them when they needed me most. Sarah made a note. Victoria, I'm going to say something that may be difficult to hear. Are you ready? No, but say it anyway. Your daughters don't hate you. They're afraid of you, but not because of what you did, because of what they think they did to you. Victoria's confusion must have shown on her face because Sarah continued. Think about it from their perspective. They're 4 years old. They get in a terrible accident. They scream for their mother. She doesn't come immediately. When she finally arrives, she's hysterical with grief and guilt. She tells them over and over how sorry she is, how she failed them. I was apologizing for not being there, but they heard, I'm sorry you exist. They heard, this is my fault, which their 4-year-old brains translated as, you are my fault. They've spent 4 years thinking they're the reason you're miserable, that if they'd never existed, you'd be happy. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her breath caught. No, I never meant. Intent doesn't matter, impact matters. And the impact of your guilt has been teaching your daughters that they're a burden, that their very existence is a problem you're trying to fix. Victoria stood abruptly, pacing to the window. So what do I do? How do I undo 4 years of damage? You start by letting someone else help them. Marcus Wade, if he's qualified. Your daughters need to rebuild their sense of self-worth with someone who isn't carrying the weight of parental guilt. He said the same thing, said I need to step back. Can you do that? Victoria laughed, the sound harsh and brittle. Step back from my own children, abdicate my role as their mother to a janitor I met 3 weeks ago. You're not abdicating. You're allowing space for healing that can't happen while you're the primary presence in their lives. Victoria turned from the window. I don't know if I can do that. Every instinct says I should be there, fighting for them, fixing this. Those instincts are what created the problem. Your daughters don't need you to fix them. They need you to be vulnerable, to be human, to be wrong and scared and unsure. Can you be those things? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria had built her career on being right, on having answers, on projecting confidence even when she felt none. The idea of showing Emma and Sophie her fear, her uncertainty, her profound belief that she'd destroyed their lives, it felt like surrender. But maybe surrender was the point. Maybe the only way to win this battle was to stop fighting it. Victoria's voice came out barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be vulnerable. I've spent 30 years learning to be strong. Then maybe it's time to learn something new. Thursday brought storm warnings, the kind of severe weather that made Chicago residents check their emergency supplies and debate whether to brave the commute or work from home. Marcus checked the weather report 3 times before his shift. Severe thunderstorms predicted for late afternoon. Lightning, high winds, potential hail. The kind of weather that made building maintenance crews nervous and triggered anxiety in anyone with trauma history. Emma and Sophie had trauma history. So did Marcus, though his was different in shape and origin. He arrived at work earlier than usual, found Bob already in the maintenance office, reviewing emergency protocols with 2 younger technicians. Bob glanced up. You see the forecast? Hard to miss. Going to be a rough one. Weather Service is calling for possible tornado rotation. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Buildings this tall were designed to withstand severe weather. But designed to withstand and actually comfortable during were 2 different things. Bob continued speaking to the whole group now. Standard storm protocols. Elevators go to automatic safety mode if we lose primary power. They'll pause between floors until backup generators kick in, usually 10-15 seconds. But if someone's inside when it happens, they're gonna panic. One of the younger techs asked, what do we do if someone's stuck? Emergency roof access. There's panels here, here, and here. Bob pointed to a schematic on the wall. That let you reach the elevator car from above. Need the override key and access code. Bob walked them through the procedure, showed them where the emergency equipment was stored, made them practice the override sequence until they could do it blind. Marcus filed every detail away. His brain still worked like a therapist's brain, always preparing for worst-case scenarios, always having contingency plans ready before they were needed. After the briefing, Marcus pulled Bob aside. The Chen twins, they have therapy today at 5. Yeah, I know. Dr. Morrison's regular Thursday slot. They were in a car accident 4 years ago. Thunder, lightning, confined spaces, each of those are potential triggers. Bob's weathered face showed understanding. You thinking we should cancel their session? I'm thinking if the storm hits during their session and the building loses power, those girls are going to relive the worst day of their lives. And if they're in an elevator when it happens, Jesus, okay, I'll talk to building management, see if we can reschedule. But management wasn't available. Victoria was in meetings all day. Dr. Morrison had a packed schedule, and Thursday at 5 was the only slot that worked with the twins' medication timing. The session would proceed. The storm would arrive, and Marcus had a very bad feeling about how those two facts would intersect. By 4:30, the sky had turned the color of bruises. Wind rattled the windows on the 42nd floor hard enough that people stopped working to stare outside. Marcus positioned himself near the therapy suite. He'd finished his official duties 2 hours ago, but claimed he needed to reorganize supplies. Jake sat in the break room doing homework protected by interior walls in ignorance of his father's growing anxiety. Emma and Sophie arrived at 4:45, pushed by their nurse Linda. The girls looked tense already, shoulders rigid, hands clenched. They could sense the atmospheric pressure changing, could feel the storm approaching, even before the first drops of rain hit. Thunder rumbled, distant but growing closer. Emma flinched. Sophie's breathing quickened. Marcus wanted to walk in there, wanted to crouch beside their wheelchairs and use every calming technique he'd mastered. But that wasn't his role. He was the custodian, the observer, the man who waited for permission to help. Dr. Morrison arrived 5 minutes late, harried and apologetic. Sorry, traffic was insane. Everyone trying to get home before the storm hits. He disappeared into the therapy suite. The door closed. Marcus stood in the hallway with his cleaning cart and his mounting dread. The storm hit at 5:03, not gradually, not with warning, just a wall of rain and wind that turned the world outside the windows into chaos. Thunder cracked directly overhead. The building swayed, imperceptible to most, but Marcus felt it through the soles of his feet. Lights flickered. Once. Twice. Marcus heard a small sound from the therapy suite, high-pitched, terrified. The lights went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in amber. The backup generators hummed to life, the sound vibrating through the walls. But there was a gap. 10 seconds where the building held its breath between power sources. And in those 10 seconds, Marcus heard something that stopped his heart. The therapy suite door flew open. Dr. Morrison's face pale in the emergency lighting. The girls, they rolled toward the elevator. I tried to stop them, but Marcus was running before the doctor finished speaking. The elevator bay, both wheelchairs visible just inside the open doors. Marcus lunged forward, got his hand on Emma's chair, pulled her back into the hallway. But the doors were already closing. Sophie inside, alone. The last thing Marcus saw before the door sealed was Sophie's face, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream that had no sound because Sophie hadn't made sounds in 4 years. The elevator engaged, started moving, then stopped between floors 39 and 40. Standard safety protocol during power transitions. Except there was a 9-year-old girl trapped inside. A 9-year-old girl reliving the worst trauma of her life in complete darkness and isolation. Marcus's training took over. He turned to Dr. Morrison. Call building security. Tell them there's a child in elevator 3. Traumatized, nonverbal, alone. He turned to Linda. Get Mrs. Chen, now. He turned to Emma, who was making sounds Marcus had never heard from her. Keening sounds, grief sounds. Her sister was trapped, and Emma was experiencing the trauma, vicariously feeling Sophie's terror through whatever twin connection they shared. Marcus knelt beside Emma's wheelchair. Listen to me. Sophie is scared, but she's safe. The elevator is stable. It's not falling. It's not moving. It's just stopped. Can you hear me? Emma's eyes found his, desperate, pleading. Marcus kept his voice steady. I'm going to get her out. I promise you I'm going to get your sister out. But I need you to stay here with Dr. Morrison. Can you do that? Emma grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd spent 4 years in a wheelchair. Her mouth moved, working to form shapes she hadn't made in 4 years. Shh. The sound was barely audible. So, Marcus's breath caught. Emma was trying to say her sister's name. Sophie, Marcus finished for her. I know, I'm going to get Sophie, I promise. He gently extracted his arm from Emma's grip, stood, ran toward the maintenance access. Behind him, Victoria's voice echoed through the hallway. What happened? Where are my daughters? Dr. Morrison's response was lost in the sound of Marcus's footsteps pounding toward the service quarter. The maintenance shaft access required a key Marcus didn't have. He'd watched Bob open it a dozen times, knew the approximate location of the lock, found it by feel in the emergency lighting. The door was secured with a combination lock. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. Bob's birthday, the building address, some standard facility code. His fingers moved across the dial. 3 attempts. 4. On the 5th try, the lock clicked on open. The shaft yawned before him. Dark, narrow, the elevator car hung suspended below, visible only as a darker shadow against the darkness. Marcus had no safety equipment, no authorization, no backup. He had only the memory of Sophie's silent scream and Emma's desperate grip and his own promise, I'm going to get her out. He swung himself into the shaft, found the maintenance ladder welded to the wall, started climbing down. The ladder was slick with condensation. His hand slipped twice. He caught himself both times through muscle memory and terror-fueled adrenaline. 20 feet down, 30. The elevator car came into view below him. He could hear Sophie now, or thought he could. Tiny sounds that might have been breathing or crying or both. Marcus reached the elevator roof, felt for the emergency hatch, found it locked from inside exactly as Bob had warned. He pulled the override key from his pocket. He'd pocketed it during the morning briefing, instinct telling him he'd need it, and inserted it into the access panel. The hatch released with a mechanical click. Marcus lowered himself through the opening, dropped into the elevator car. Sophie was pressed into the corner wheelchair, locked in place, her whole body shaking with tremors that looked like they'd never stop. Her face was wet with tears, but her crying was silent, had always been silent, would maybe always be silent, until Marcus knelt in front of her and said her name. And Sophie looked at him with eyes that held every fear a 9-year-old could experience, and whispered the first words she'd spoken in 4 years, scared. The next 3 minutes happened in fragments. Marcus wrapping Sophie's hand around his forearm, grounding her with physical contact, his voice steady and low. I know you're scared. This feels like the car accident, doesn't it? The darkness, the being trapped, the not knowing if help will come. Sophie's head moving, a nod. Yes, but this is different. That time you were hurt. This time you're safe. That time your mom couldn't get to you fast enough. This time I am already here, and I'm not going anywhere until we're both out. He could hear voices above, Victoria screaming her daughter's names, security trying to calm her. The mechanical sounds of the manual override being engaged, but Marcus focused only on Sophie, on the child in front of him who'd just spoken her first word in 4 years and needed to know that speaking was safe. His hand found Sophie's, held it, can you breathe with me like we practiced by the window? In for 4 counts. He demonstrated. Exaggerated inhale. Sophie watched, then tried to match him. Her breathing was shaky, uneven, but following the pattern. Hold for 4. They held together. Out for 4. Together they exhaled. The elevator doors above them groaned, started to part, emergency personnel with pry bars forcing the mechanism open. Light flooded in, amber emergency lighting, but it felt like sunrise. Marcus looked up at the opening, saw firefighters, saw building security, saw Victoria's face pale and frantic. But he didn't move. Not yet. Because Sophie still had his hand, still needed him to be the steady presence that said she mattered more than efficiency or protocol or getting out of the way so professionals could work. He looked back at Sophie. Your mom is up there. She's been so worried. Should we let her know you're okay? Sophie's eyes moved to the opening above, to where Victoria's face was visible, tears streaming, hands reaching down, even though the distance was too great. And Sophie's mouth moved, formed a word, pushed it out with effort that seemed to cost her everything, Mom. One word, barely audible, but unmistakable. Above them, Victoria made a sound like something breaking and reforming simultaneously. Marcus called up, we're okay, Sophie's okay, we're coming up now. The firefighters lowered a harness. Marcus secured it around Sophie's wheelchair, then around her body. They lifted her, carefully transferred her to the hallway. Marcus climbed out after her. His hands were bleeding from the rough ladder. His uniform was filthy with shaft grime. He didn't care. Victoria had both daughters now. Emma and Sophie's wheelchairs pulled close, her arms around both girls as much as the medical equipment allowed. And both girls were making sounds. Not words yet, just small vocalizations, grunts and whimpers and exhalations that carried meaning even without language. Dr. Morrison stood nearby with a phone calling someone. Probably the neurologist. Probably trying to understand how two girls who hadn't spoken in 4 years had suddenly found their voices. Marcus knew the answer. Trauma could lock voices away, but trauma could also break the locks. Sophie had been terrified enough in that elevator that her survival instinct overrode her psychological blocks. Sometimes the only way through fear was directly into it. Richard Vance appeared at the end of the hallway. Marcus saw him stop, saw him take in the scene, saw something cross his face that looked like conflict and guilt and calculation all mixed together. Then Richard turned and walked away without saying a word. Marcus would think about that later, would wonder what Richard Vance knew that made him look at his rescued nieces like he'd seen a ghost. But right now Marcus was watching Victoria Chen cry openly while her daughters leaned into her embrace, watching a mother and children begin to rebuild what had been shattered, watching the first fragile steps toward healing that would require months or years to complete, but had started tonight in an elevator shaft with a terrified girl and a promise kept. Jake appeared from the break room. He took in the scene with 7-year-old comprehension, then walked straight to Emma and Sophie. "You guys okay? That was scary, huh?" Emma looked at Jake, her face still wet with tears, and she spoke her first full sentence in 4 years. "My sister was brave." Sophie shook her head. "Marcus was brave." Jake grinned. "Dad's always brave, but you guys were brave too. Being scared and doing it anyway, that's the bravest kind." Marcus felt something crack in his chest. His son, his wise and possibly empathetic son, who understood courage better than most adults. Victoria looked up at Marcus, her face destroyed by tears and relief and gratitude too large to speak. She didn't need to speak. Marcus saw it all in her eyes. The building lights flickered back to full power. The storm was passing. The crisis was over. But the healing had just begun. The medical suite on 42 had been designed for privacy and efficiency. Chrome examination tables, state-of-the-art monitoring equipment, abstract art chosen by consultants who believed pastels reduce patient anxiety. Dr. Lauren Park arrived within 20 minutes of Victoria's emergency call. She was younger than the previous neurologist's early 40s, with silver streaking through black hair she wore in a practical ponytail. Her reputation preceded her Johns Hopkins residency at Mass General, published research on trauma-induced selective mutism that had earned her recognition in rehabilitation circles. Emma and Sophie sat in their wheelchairs while Dr. Park ran her assessments. Victoria stood against the wall, arms crossed her entire body, radiating the kind of tension that came from hope, warring with 4 years of learned pessimism. Marcus had stayed at Victoria's explicit request. He leaned against the door frame, keeping himself peripheral, but present, watching the doctor work with professional interest he couldn't quite suppress. Dr. Park held up a pen light. "Emma, can you follow this with your eyes?" Emma tracked the light. Left, right, up, down. "Good. Now can you tell me your name?" Emma's mouth worked, the effort visible in her face. "Finally, Emma Chen." "Excellent. How old are you?" 9. The word came easier this time, like each vocalization was oiling machinery that had rusted from disuse. Dr. Park turned to Sophie. "Your turn. Can you tell me how you're feeling right now?" Sophie's hands gripped her wheelchair armrests. Her voice came out rough, uncertain, tired, scared. "But, okay." Victoria made a sound. Dr. Park glanced at her. "Mrs. Chen, I know this is emotional, but I need you to remain as neutral as possible. The girls are reading your reactions." Victoria bit her lip, nodded, forced her expression into something resembling professional calm. Dr. Park continued her examination for another 15 minutes. Motor function tests, cognitive assessments, memory checks, response times. The full battery Marcus recognized from his own clinical practice. When she finished, Dr. Park gestured Victoria and Marcus into the adjacent consultation room. Through the glass partition, they could see Emma and Sophie with Linda the nurse, both girls looking exhausted but alert. Dr. Park pulled up charts on a tablet. Preliminary findings, both girls demonstrate fully functional speech capabilities. Neurologically, there's no physical damage preventing vocalization. The 4-year silence was psychological, not physiological. Victoria's voice came tight. 4 years of specialists told me it might be permanent brain damage. They were treating symptoms without addressing root cause. Classic mistake in trauma cases. Everyone focused on the paralysis and assumed the mutism was related. But selective mutism operates independently of physical injury. Marcus spoke for the first time since entering the medical suite. What triggered the breakthrough tonight? Dr. Park studied him. You're the custodian Victoria mentioned, the one with the Hopkins background. Former background, but yes. Then you already know the answer. Extreme stress can override psychological blocks when survival instinct kicks in. Sophie was alone, terrified, regressed to the moment of her original trauma. Her brain had to choose maintain the protective silence or cry out for help. Survival won. She turned back to Victoria. The question now isn't whether they can speak. They've proven they can. The question is whether they'll continue speaking. Whether the neural pathways they just reopened will stay open or slam shut again if they encounter additional stress. What do they need? Consistent trauma-informed therapy. Safe environments where speaking doesn't carry emotional risk. And Dr. Park paused, choosing her words carefully. They need to rebuild their relationship with you. Whatever happened during or after the accident created an association between you and trauma. That needs repair work. Victoria's face drained of color. Marcus watched her sway slightly, caught herself. Dr. Park's voice gentled. I'm not assigning blame. Trauma responses are complex. Children make meaning from events in ways adults don't anticipate. But the data is clear. Both girls showed elevated stress responses every time you entered their environment. That has to change for sustained progress. How? Family therapy with someone who specializes in parent-child trauma dynamics. And possibly, she glanced at Marcus, continued work with Mr. Wade if he's willing. The girls respond to him. That's valuable. Marcus felt the weight of 3 stairs. He'd known this was coming. Had known the moment he climbed into that elevator shaft that he was committing himself to something larger than observation and care from a distance. His voice came out rougher than intended. I'll help, but I have conditions. Victoria straightened. Name them. My son comes first, always. Any conflict between his needs and your daughter's needs, Jake wins. Agreed, Minda. I work flexible hours, no fixed schedule. I show up when I can, absent when I can't, no explanations required. Agreed. And you accept that I might fail. That despite my credentials and your resources and everyone's best intentions, Emma and Sophie might regress, might stop speaking again, might never fully recover. You accept that possibility without blame or recrimination. The last condition came from a place Marcus usually kept locked, the place where Claire's ghost lived, where the memory of his failure still cut like fresh wounds. Victoria met his eyes. I accept it, but I don't believe it. I watched you climb into an elevator shaft to keep a promise to a 9-year-old. Men who keep promises like that don't fail children. I failed my wife. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Dr. Park looked between them, professional curiosity warring with social discomfort. Victoria's response came soft but firm. Your wife had a stroke. You're not God. You can't resurrect dead brain tissue or reverse vascular catastrophe. That wasn't failure. That was medicine reaching its limits. Doesn't feel different. I know. Victoria's voice held the weight of 4 years carrying guilt for an accident she didn't cause. But we don't get to hide from our abilities because we're afraid of our limitations. The world needs what we can do, even when what we can do isn't enough. Marcus stared at this woman who'd been a stranger 3 weeks ago. This Ice Queen CEO who'd just articulated his deepest fear with more clarity than he'd managed in 2 years of avoiding therapy. Jake's voice carried through from the medical suite. Dad, Emma wants to show you something. The moment broke. Marcus turned toward his son's call, grateful for the interruption. Emma had drawn something on the paper Linda provided. Crude stick figures. 3 of them. One tall, 2 small one, very small. Labels underneath in shaky handwriting, Marcus, Emma and Sophie, Jake. She held the paper up her face, showing the kind of pride children display when offering gifts they believe are valuable. Marcus took the drawing like it was spun glass. "This is really good, Emma. Can I keep it?" Emma nodded. Then with obvious effort, "Thank you for Sophie." "You're welcome. You're both very brave." Sophie's voice joined her sister's. "You climbed down in the dark." "Had to. Made you a promise." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears. Something else. Relief maybe, or the release of 4 years of tension, finally finding an outlet. She reached out, took Marcus's hand, held it while she cried silently, shoulders shaking. Sophie rolled her wheelchair closer, took his other hand. Marcus knelt between them, this man who'd tried so hard not to care about anything except his son's well-being, and let 2 traumatized girls anchor themselves to him while they processed emotions too large for their small bodies to contain. Victoria watched from the doorway. Dr. Park stood beside her, making notes on her tablet. Jake wormed his way into the huddle. Group hug, Marcus pulled his son close. Now he was the anchor for 3 children, and the weight of that responsibility should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home. The police detective arrived at Richard Vance's office without warning at 9 a.m. Friday morning. Richard was reviewing quarterly projections, trying to focus on numbers that refused to stay steady in his vision. The detective was mid-40s, black, wearing an off-the-rack suit that suggested municipal salary rather than private sector. His badge read Detective Anderson, Chicago PD. He settled into the visitor's choice without invitation. "Mr. Vance, I'm investigating an incident from 4 years ago. The vehicular assault case involving your nieces, Emma and Sophie Chen." Richard's pulse spiked, but his face remained neutral. "That case was closed. Driver was never apprehended." "Case was never closed, just went cold due to lack of evidence. But yesterday we received new information from an anonymous source. Documentation suggesting the driver's disappearance wasn't random. That he received financial assistance from someone connected to the Chen family." "What kind of documentation?" Anderson pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. Bank statements, wire transfers, communications between Richard's Shell Corporation and the Nevada law firm that had represented the driver. Richard's carefully constructed world began crumbling at its foundation. "Where did you get these anonymous tip, verified through subpoena? Mr. Vance, I need you to explain these payments." Richard could have lawyered up immediately, should have, but 4 years of guilt had been building toward this moment, and part of him felt relief that it was finally happening. His voice came out flat, emotionless. "I hired the driver, through an intermediary, instructed him to cause a minor accident, something that would create a scandal, make my sister look negligent. The driver was supposed to run a yellow light, create a fender bender, nothing serious." Anderson's expression didn't change. But that's not what happened. The driver panicked, hit the accelerator instead of braking, turned a minor collision into a catastrophe. Richard laughed, the sound bitter. "I wanted to damage Victoria's reputation. Instead, I destroyed my niece's lives." "Why, Tuero?" "Because Victoria took everything from me. The company, my father's approval, the legacy I'd built. She came back from Harvard, and suddenly I was second place in everything." Richard met the detective's eyes. "Not an excuse, just the truth. I was angry, jealous, stupid, Joe." Anderson made notes. "After the accident, you arranged the driver's disappearance. Paid his legal fees, arranged his relocation, made sure he'd never testify in any civil proceedings. I couldn't undo what I'd done, but I could prevent anyone from tracing it back to me. Until now." "Until now," Anderson closed his notebook. "Richard Vance, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit vehicular assault, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. You have the right to remain silent." And the Miranda rights washed over Richard like white noise. He was thinking about Victoria, about Emma and Sophie, about the 4 years he'd watched them suffer while knowing he'd caused their pain, about the way Sophie had looked last night after being rescued from the elevator. The hope in her face, the trust. Richard had put her in that wheelchair, had stolen her voice for 4 years, had destroyed his sister's family because his ego couldn't handle being second best. The handcuffs closed around his wrists. Cold metal. Final. Richard's attorney would have him out on bail by afternoon, would negotiate a plea that involved cooperation and reduced charges, would spin this as a tragic mistake rather than calculated cruelty. But Richard knew the truth, knew what he'd done, knew he'd have to look Victoria in the eyes and confess the unforgivable. Anderson led him toward the elevator. They passed Victoria's office. She stood at her window back to the corridor, unaware her brother was being arrested 20 feet away. Richard wanted to stop, wanted to tell her, wanted to beg forgiveness he didn't deserve. But Anderson kept moving, and Richard let himself be led away in silence. Victoria received the call from building security 45 minutes later. She listened to the explanation without speaking, her face transforming from confusion to horror to something beyond horror that had no name. She hung up, sat perfectly still. Her brother, Richard, the person she'd trusted to investigate the accident, the person who'd helped her navigate the nightmare of medical decisions and legal proceedings. Richard had caused it all. Jennifer appeared at the door. "Mrs. Chen, your 10 o'clock is cancel everything today. Everything this week. I don't care what it is." Jennifer retreated. Victoria pulled out her phone, dialed a number she'd memorized but never used except in emergencies. Dr. Sarah Chen answered on the second ring. "Victoria, I need an emergency session. Now, if you're with a patient, I'll wait. But I need you now." "Come in, I'll make space." Victoria grabbed her purse, her coat, walked out of her office without speaking to anyone. The elevator ride down felt like falling through darkness. The cab ride to Lincoln Park felt like traveling through water. Sarah's office, the leather chair, the box of tissues within reach because Sarah had learned Victoria's patterns. Victoria didn't cry. Crying required emotional capacity she didn't currently possess. Instead, she recited facts. "My brother hired the drunk driver, orchestrated the accident, paid for the cover-up, 4 years. 4 years I blamed myself for being in that meeting, for not driving them personally, for trusting a service Richard recommended. And he knew the whole time." Sarah's professional composure slipped microscopically. "You're certain police arrested him this morning? He confessed. Apparently he was trying to create a minor scandal. Make me look like a negligent mother so the board would question my judgment. It went wrong. The driver panicked. And my daughters—" The words cut off. Victoria pressed her fist against her mouth. Sarah leaned forward. "What are you feeling right now?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." Victoria's voice came out mechanical. "How do I tell Emma and Sophie? How do I explain that their uncle, the man who brought them birthday presents and read them stories, is the reason they can't walk, the reason they spent 4 years silent? Do you have to tell them? Don't they deserve to know? They're 9 years old. 9-year-olds don't need to know that family members are capable of destroying them. They need to feel safe. The truth can wait until they're old enough to process it without it destroying the foundation you're trying to rebuild." Victoria stood paced to the window. "I want to kill him. I want to walk into that jail and tear him apart with my bare hands." "Understandable. I trusted him. After our parents died, Richard was the only family I had, the only person who understood what it meant to grow up Chen to carry the weight of those expectations. And he tried to destroy me by hurting my children. Not tried, did. He succeeded in hurting them. What matters now is whether you let that destruction be permanent." Victoria whirled from the window. How do I move forward knowing my brother is the reason for everything wrong in my daughter's lives? The same way you've moved forward through everything else. One step, one day, one moment of choosing them over your pain. I don't know if I can do that. Yes, you do. You've been doing it for 4 years. You just thought you were moving forward from an accident. Now you know you're moving forward from a betrayal. The path hasn't changed, just your understanding of it." Victoria sank back into the chair. Her hands shook. Her breath came in shallow gasps that might have been panic, or might have been rage, or might have been both. Sarah's voice stayed steady, clinical. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to grieve. You're going to rage. You're going to hate your brother with an intensity that scares you. And then eventually you're going to have to decide whether forgiveness is something you can access. Not for his sake, for yours. I'm never forgiving him. That's fine. Forgiveness isn't required. But if you carry hatred this intense while trying to heal your daughters, the hatred will poison everything you touch. They'll absorb it, make it their own. The words hit like Marcus's observation about the girl sensing Victoria's self-hatred, like another mirror held up showing Victoria how her interior landscape shaped her daughter's reality. She pressed her palms against her eyes. I just want them to be okay. I just want to give them a childhood that isn't defined by trauma and wheelchairs and silence. Then you focus on that, not on Richard, not on revenge or justice or any of the things that feel important, but ultimately don't serve Emma and Sophie. You focus on being present, on rebuilding trust, on showing them that the world, despite its betrayals, is still worth engaging with. That's a lot to ask. Being a mother always is. Duh. Marcus found Victoria in the therapy suite that afternoon. She sat on the floor between Emma and Sophie's wheelchairs, no regard for her expensive suit, holding both their hands, while Linda read them a story. The girls were talking more, short sentences, halting vocabulary, but talking. Sophie had asked for apple juice twice. Emma had commented on a bird outside the window. Small miracles accumulating. Marcus knocked softly on the doorframe. Victoria looked up, her face showing the aftermath of whatever emotional storm she'd weathered. She spoke quietly to Linda. Can you stay with them for a few minutes? Linda nodded. Victoria followed Marcus into the hallway. She spoke before Marcus could. Did you hear about Richard? Building security filled me in. I'm sorry. Don't be, he earned it. Victoria leaned against the wall, all the CEO composure stripped away. I don't know how to process this, how to separate my anger at him from my need to be present for my daughters. You don't separate it, you carry both. Human beings are big enough to contain contradictions. Are they? Because right now I feel like I'm going to shatter. Marcus understood that feeling, had lived with it for 2 years. The sensation of being held together by willpower and habit, while everything inside screamed for release. Then shatter, not in front of the girls, not where it impacts your ability to function, but somewhere private with someone who can hold the pieces until you're ready to reassemble. Is that what you did after your wife died? The question should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like fair exchange. Victoria had trusted him with her daughters. The least he could do was trust her with his truth. His voice came out raw. I didn't shatter, I imploded. Slow collapse over 6 months. Stopped answering calls, stopped showering, stopped caring about anything except Jake, because he was the only thing tethering me to life. My colleagues did interventions. My friends stopped calling when I didn't return their messages. Eventually, I realized I had 2 choices: get help or disappear entirely. What made you choose help? Jake asked me why I was sad all the time. He was 18 months old, barely talking, but he could feel my grief like it was a physical presence in our apartment. I realized I was poisoning him with my pain. So I got up, went through the motions, faked functioning until it became real functioning. Victoria absorbed this. You're saying fake it until you make it. I'm saying children are resilient, but they need adults to model survival. Emma and Sophie need to see you navigating grief and betrayal while still choosing to live fully. That becomes their template for how to handle their own trauma. I don't feel capable of living fully. I feel capable of making it through the next 5 minutes without screaming. Then make it through the next 5 minutes. Then the 5 after that. Eventually you'll have made it through a day, then a week, then a lifetime. Victoria laughed, bitter and exhausted. That's your advice, 1 minute at a time. It's the only advice that worked for me. They stood in silence, 2 people carrying impossible weight, finding strange comfort in shared understanding. Emma's voice carried from the therapy suite. Mama. Victoria's head snapped toward the sound. Amakuma had called her Mama, not Mrs. Chen or Mother, but the childish, diminutive Sophie had just started using. Victoria moved toward the door. Marcus caught her arm gently. Remember what Dr. Park said? Neutral reactions. Don't overwhelm them with your emotion. How do I stay neutral when my daughter just called me Mama for the first time in 4 years? You breathe, you smile, you tell her you heard her, and you save the tears for later when she can't see them. Victoria took 3 deep breaths, wiped her eyes, walked into the therapy suite with her face composed but her eyes shining. Emma looked up. Mama, can we go to the park someday? The question held layers. Can we leave this building? Can we exist in the world? Can we be normal children, doing normal things? Victoria knelt beside Emma's wheelchair. We can go to the park anytime you want, sweetheart. This weekend if the weather's nice. Would you like that? Emma nodded. Sophie joined in. Feed the ducks. We'll feed all the ducks. We'll bring so much bread the ducks will be too full to swim. Both girls smiled. Small smiles. Careful smiles. But smiles. Marcus watched from the doorway this tableau of mother and daughters rebuilding what had been broken and felt his own eyes sting. Jake appeared at his side. They're talking now. Yeah, buddy, they are. That's because of you, isn't it? Marcus pulled his son close. It's because of a lot of people. Me, I saw you do, their mom, Dr. Park, even the storm in a weird way. Sometimes healing requires a catalyst, something big enough to break through all the protection we build around our wounds. Like when you stop being sad all the time. The observation cut straight through Marcus's carefully maintained composure. Jake had been 18 months old when Claire died. Marcus had thought his son was too young to remember those dark months. Apparently not. Marcus knelt to Jake's eye level. Yeah, like that. I had to hit bottom before I could start climbing back up. I'm glad you climbed back. I like having my dad happy. I like being your dad. Best job I've ever had. Jake hugged him fiercely. Marcus held his son, while 20 feet away, Victoria held her daughters, both families navigating the complicated terrain of trauma recovery, both finding their way towards something that might eventually resemble peace. 6 weeks passed in a rhythm of small victories and minor setbacks. Emma spoke in full sentences now, though she still went silent when overwhelmed. Sophie's vocabulary expanded daily, but her voice remained softer than Emma's, like she was testing whether the world would punish her for taking up audible space. Victoria had stepped back from CEO duties, promoted her CFO to interim CEO while she took an indefinite family leave. The board had been surprisingly supportive, perhaps because Richard's arrest had made headlines, and Victoria's decision to prioritize her traumatized children played well in the press. She spent her days with Emma and Sophie now, reading to them, sitting beside them during therapy, learning to be still in their presence instead of constantly trying to fix or improve or solve. It was the hardest thing Victoria had ever done, harder than building a company, harder than navigating board politics, harder than anything except watching her daughters suffer. But slowly, painfully, the girls began to relax around her. Their shoulders stopped tensing when she entered rooms. Their breathing stayed steady when she spoke. They started reaching for her hand instead of pulling away. Progress, microscopic but measurable. Marcus had been coming 3 times a week working with Emma and Sophie on what he called communication confidence building. Not formal therapy, just creating environments where speaking felt safe and natural. Jake remained part of the equation. He'd show up after school, do his homework in the therapy suite, casually chat with the twins like they were regular kids having regular conversations. His presence normalized everything. The physical therapy sessions had evolved too. DeMar Morrison reported something unexpected. Emma's lower body was responding to stimulation. Tiny movements, toe twitches, nothing dramatic but enough to suggest the paralysis might not be as complete as originally diagnosed. Park had a theory severe psychological trauma could suppress motor function. As Emma's psychological state improved, dormant neural pathways were reactivating. Recovery might be possible. Might be. No guarantees. But possibility was more than they'd had before. Victoria stood at her office window. She still came in twice a week to handle essential decisions, watching Chicago's autumn transform the lake into hammered silver. Her phone rang, the lawyer handling Richard's case. She answered yes. Mrs. Chen, your brother wants to see you. He's asked for a meeting at the detention facility. I've arranged it for tomorrow, if you are willing. Victoria's first instinct was to refuse. She hadn't seen Richard since his arrest, had communicated only through lawyers. The thought of sitting across from him made her stomach churn. But Sarah had said something in their last session. Forgiveness isn't about him. It's about releasing the hold his betrayal has on your life. You can't release what you won't acknowledge. Victoria heard herself say, tomorrow at 2, I'll be there. The Cook County Detention Facility smelled like industrial cleaner and despair. Victoria sat in a private consultation room waiting. her hands clasped on the metal table to keep them from shaking. Richard appeared in an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller than she remembered. Older, his eyes held the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying guilt too heavy to set down. He sat across from her. The guard positioned himself at the door present, but creating the illusion of privacy. Richard spoke first. "Thank you for coming." Victoria said nothing. Waited. "I know there's nothing I can say. No apology big enough. No explanation that makes it less monstrous." Richard's voice cracked. "I hired that driver to create a minor scandal. I wanted the board to question your judgment. I wanted you to look like the kind of person who put work before family. The irony being, I was exactly that person. I was so consumed by jealousy that I became the monster I was accusing you of being." Still, Victoria said nothing. The driver was supposed to run a yellow light, create a fender bender, maybe some whiplash, nothing life-threatening. But he panicked. He accelerated. And Emma and Sophie? "Don't say their names," Victoria's voice came out sharp as cut glass. "You don't get to say their names," Richard flinched. "I've watched you suffer for 4 years. Watched them suffer, knowing it was my fault. I tried to fix it. Tried to hire the best specialist to support your decisions, to be the brother who helped you through catastrophe. But that was just more selfishness. I was assuaging my own guilt instead of confessing what I'd done. Why confess now? Why not take it to your grave? Because someone sent the police those documents. Someone knew what I'd done and decided the truth mattered more than family loyalty." Victoria's breath caught. She'd wondered who tipped off the police, had assumed a whistleblower or a disgruntled employee. But Richard's tone suggested he knew. "It was you, wasn't it?" Victoria met her brother's eyes. "I found the Shell Corporation records 3 weeks ago. After Marcus told me the girl's trauma stemmed from abandonment feelings, I started reviewing everything from the accident, looking for patterns. I found your payments to the Nevada law firm. I traced them back. And I made a choice. You turned in your own brother. I chose my daughters over my brother, the way I should have chosen them 4 years ago instead of that fucking board meeting." The profanity felt good, felt honest. Victoria so rarely allowed herself unfiltered language. Richard absorbed this. "I deserve everything coming to me. Prison, public shame, losing the company, losing you. I deserve all of it. You think that's what I want, for you to suffer, isn't it?" Victoria leaned forward. "What I want is for my daughters to walk again, to speak without fear, to have a childhood that isn't defined by trauma you caused. Your suffering doesn't accomplish any of that. Your suffering is just more pain in a world already overflowing with pain. Then what do you want from me? I want you to disappear, take your plea deal, serve your time. And when you get out, I want you to build a life somewhere else, somewhere Emma and Sophie will never have to see you and remember what you took from them." Richard's face crumbled. "So this is goodbye. This is consequence. You made choices. Those choices destroyed my family. Now you live with the results. Do you hate me?" The question hung between them. Victoria considered lying, considered saying yes, she hated him with every cell in her body. But the truth was more complicated. "I hate what you did. I hate that I trusted you. I hate that I'll always wonder if your advice over the past 4 years was genuine or just more manipulation. But you, my brother, the person who taught me to ride a bike and helped me study for the SATs and was the only other person who understood what it meant to be Dad's child. I don't know if I hate you. I just know I can't have you in my life anymore." Richard nodded slowly. Tears tracked down his face. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate. I know sorry doesn't heal spinal cords or give back lost years. But I am genuinely completely sorry. I know. That's what makes this so hard. If you were a monster, this would be easy. But you're just a broken person who broke others' people." Victoria stood. The guard moved to open the door. Richard called out, "Will you tell them, Emma and Sophie? Will you tell them what I did?" Victoria paused at the threshold. "No, they're 9. They don't need to know their uncle tried to destroy them. If they ask when they're older, I'll tell them the truth. But for now, I'm protecting them from one more thing that would hurt them. Consider it a gift you don't deserve." She walked out without looking back. left Richard sitting alone in that gray room with the weight of his choices. In the parking lot, Victoria sat in her car and allowed herself 5 minutes to fall apart. 5 minutes of crying so hard she couldn't breathe. 5 minutes of rage and grief and betrayal vomiting out of her system. Then she wiped her eyes, fixed her makeup as best she could, drove back toward Chen Industries where her daughters waited. She'd meant what she told Sarah. She was choosing them over her pain. Every day, every hour, every moment, until choosing them became as natural as breathing. 12 months later, Victoria stood in a garden on the roof of Chen Industries Tower. The space had been transformed from corporate, entertaining venue to something warmer, more human. String lights crisscrossed overhead, tables scattered with comfortable seating, a stage area where a podium stood waiting. The Voices Foundation was launching today. Victoria's gift to families navigating what she'd navigated. Free therapy services, research funding, support groups, everything she wished had existed 4 years ago. Marcus stood near the back wearing actual slacks and a button-down instead of his custodial uniform. Jake beside him in his Sunday best, bouncing with excitement. Emma and Sophie were backstage with Linda. Both girls wore matching blue dresses Victoria had let them pick out themselves. Both girls wore smiles that reached their eyes. But one thing had changed, would change everything. Emma was standing, not in her wheelchair. Standing on her own 2 feet with forearm crutches supporting her weight. The paralysis had been 60% physical, 40% psychological. As her psychological trauma healed, her motor function had begun returning, slowly, requiring intense physical therapy, but returning. Dr. Morrison predicted full mobility by age 12. Emma might never run marathons, but she'd walk. She'd dance. She'd move through the world on her own terms. Sophie's paralysis was more complete. Physical damage too extensive to reverse. But Sophie had made peace with her wheelchair, called it her superpower, because it made her faster than Emma now. Different paths, different outcomes, both valid. Victoria took the stage as the afternoon sun painted everything gold. 200 people filled the garden. Families who'd contributed, therapists who'd signed on, journalists covering the story, board members pretending they'd supported her family leave all along. She spoke into the microphone, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. 2 years ago, I lost my daughters, not to death, to silence. They stopped speaking and I stopped knowing how to reach them. I spent millions on specialists, thousands of hours on therapy, and none of it worked because I was trying to fix them instead of understanding them. She paused, found MSI and Sophie into the wings. Both girls gave her thumbs up. Victoria continued. Today, the Voices Foundation launches because no family should navigate trauma alone, because children deserve to be heard, because healing isn't about fixing what's broken, it's about accepting what's changed while honoring what remains. She gestured to the wings. My daughters Emma and Sophie would like to say a few words. Linda pushed Sophie's wheelchair onto the stage. Emma walked beside her sister, careful steps with her crutches, but independent steps. The first time many in the audience had seen Emma walk. The crowd erupted, not polite applause, genuine spontaneous celebration of a miracle they were witnessing. Emma reached the podium first, adjusted the microphone. Her voice came clear and strong. Thank you all for coming. 2 years ago, my sister and I were silent. We were scared. We thought we'd lost everything. But we didn't lose everything. We just had to find new ways to live. Sophie rolled forward. Some people will tell you that being in a wheelchair means you're broken. They're wrong. I'm different, not broken. And different is okay. Emma's turn again. We want to thank some people. Our mom who learned that love means being present, not perfect. Dr. Park and Dr. Morrison, who helped our bodies and minds heal. Marcus and Jake, who showed us that strangers can become family. Sophie's voice joined, and everyone here today who believes children deserve voices. Thank you for giving us ours back. The girls left the stage to thunderous applause. Victoria remained at the podium, tears streaming down her face, making no attempt to hide them. Marcus watched from the back, Jake clutched against his side. His son was crying, too proud of the girls he'd helped save through nothing more complicated than being himself. After the ceremony, families mingled. A woman approached Marcus, holding her 5-year-old son's hand. The boy hadn't spoken in 6 months, not since his father's death in a construction accident. The woman's voice wavered. But Wade, I read about your protocol online, about trauma-informed communication therapy. Can you help my son? Marcus looked at the boy, saw himself 2 years ago, saw Jake at 18 months, saw all the children he'd walked away from when grief became too heavy to carry. He also saw Emma and Sophie living proof that healing was possible, that staying present through the darkness eventually led to dawn. His voice came steady. Call the foundation Monday. We'll get him scheduled. I can't promise miracles, but I can promise someone will listen. The woman thanked him crying, walked away with her son, hope replacing despair in her expression. Jake tugged Marcus's sleeve. Dad, you're doing therapy again. Looks like it. Good, you're really good at it. Marcus pulled his son close. I had a good teacher. You showed me how to be present for people who are hurting, even when I didn't want to be. That's what we do though, right? We show up for people. Simple wisdom from a 7-year-old. The kind of truth that took adults decades to learn. So, the park visit happened on a Saturday 3 days later. Millennium Park as promised. Victoria had rented a private section near the lake, creating space where Emma and Sophie could exist without gawking crowds. Marcus and Jake came as invited guests. The two families had become entangled in ways that defied professional boundaries, but felt natural nonetheless. Emma walked slowly, crutches supporting her weight, but walked. Each step was victory. Each movement proof that the doctors who'd said never had been wrong. Sophie raced ahead in her wheelchair, popping wheelies, showing off for Jake, who ran beside her laughing. Victoria and Marcus walked together, comfortable in the silence between them. Finally, Victoria spoke. I've been thinking about something you said, about children needing adults to model survival. Yeah, I think adults need that too. Need to see other adults who've survived the unsurvivable. Need to know they're not alone in their pain. Marcus understood what she was really asking. You want to know if I'm surviving or just existing? Are you? He considered the question honestly. 6 months ago, I was existing, going through motions, faking functionality. But now I think I'm actually surviving, maybe even living again. Because of Emma and Sophie. Because of a lot of things, my son, your daughters, the work, the reminder that my skills matter, that I can still help people despite my failures. He paused. And maybe because you've shown me that carrying guilt doesn't honor the dead. It just punishes the living. Victoria absorbed this. I'm still working on that part, the not punishing myself part. We both are. That's okay. Healing isn't linear. Jake called out, Dad, Victoria, Emma wants to feed the ducks. They walked to the pond's edge. Victoria had brought bread despite signs saying not to feed the waterfowl. She figured one family breaking one rule in service of giving traumatized children joy was acceptable transgression. Emma tossed bread with careful movements. Sophie threw from her wheelchair with wild enthusiasm. Jake narrated the ducks' battle for food like he was announcing a sports event. Marcus stood beside Victoria watching 3 children be children and felt something in his chest that might have been hope, or might have been peace, or might have been both. Victoria's voice came soft. This is what I wanted. All those years of working 80-hour weeks, all the deals and strategies and everything I thought mattered. This is what I was actually working toward without knowing it. This moment, this peace. Was it worth it? Everything it cost to get here. No, I'd give it all back for my daughters never to have suffered. But since I can't change the past, I'll accept the present. This, she gestured at the scene before them, is enough. Emma turned, called out, Mama, can Marcus and Jake come to dinner at our house? Sophie joined in, please. We want to show Jake our room. Victoria looked at Marcus, question in her eyes. Marcus looked at Jake, who was already nodding enthusiastically. He smiled, we'd love to. As they packed up to leave, Emma using her crutches to navigate the path while Sophie raced ahead, Marcus felt Jake's hand slip into his. His son's voice came quiet, meant only for Marcus. You're happy now, aren't you, Dad? Marcus thought about Claire, about the grief that would always live in his chest, about the way trauma leaves scars that never fully fade. But he also thought about Emma's first words, Sophie's courage, Victoria's transformation, his own return to work that mattered. about how humans carry both light and darkness, how healing means learning to hold both without letting either destroy you. He squeezed Jake's hand. Yeah, buddy, I think I am. The sun was setting over the Chicago, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. 5 people walked together toward the parking lot, toward dinner, toward a future no one could have predicted 2 years ago when everything had seemed irreparably broken. Not a perfect family, not a simple story, just 5 people who'd found each other in the wreckage and chosen to build something new from the rubble. Emma paused, looking back at the pane where ducks still fought over breadcrumbs. She spoke, her voice carrying in the evening air like a bell. Sometimes broken things don't need fixing. They just need someone who sees them differently. Marcus caught Victoria's eye. She nodded slightly, both of them understanding that Emma had just articulated the wisdom it had taken them years to learn. That brokenness wasn't failure. That different wasn't less. That healing meant accepting change rather than fighting for restoration of what was. That children who'd lost their voices could speak wisdom that adults needed to hear. They walked toward the parking lot together, 5 people carrying their scars, but no longer carrying their shame, ready for whatever came next, knowing they wouldn't face it alone. The city lights began to flicker on as darkness fell. Chicago continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to individual stories of suffering and survival. But on one path in Millennium Park, healing had taken root, and that was enough.